Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and we have finally arrived at what is probably one of the most talked about reviews in the history of this channel, and certainly of this month. It is, of course, The Dark Knight Rises, 2012's very own final epic conclusion to Nolan's Batman trilogy, and we're here to talk about it. Now, what's very interesting about this film is, for anyone new here who doesn't know the whole history of us with this film, this is probably one of our most debated films, certainly among me and you. I always say that Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and this are the top two movies that we greatly differ on. So this is going to be a review and a discussion, an analysis, in-depth thing, as always. But I'd say this is probably going to be more of a debate this time around. We've been completely on the money with every other Nolan film, and probably every other Nolan movie since this one as well, really. But this one is the anomaly. There always is one, and it's going to be fun to talk about, debate, pull this one apart with you, whatever we're going to do with it for however long this one goes on for, but it's going to be good.
It's like the, not really like a missing child, but whenever it's brought up, there's always that look at, if someone brings Dark Knight Rises, in any video we do, me and you to look at each other, there's a smirk off one of us, depending on who said something. And this is the one, I think we're going to be a bit more civil than we think, but we are going to have an edge to it because we do have very different opinions on this. But as usual, before we get into the Dark Knight Rises, because I know that this is the one that does get talked about in more discourse, I guess, than Dark Knight and Batman Begins, I guess is fair. Any of you guys watching at home, do comment your thoughts on the Dark Knight Rises. If you're watching live as well, jump in because we're going to go through, we're not going to do everything. We've been doing very long reviews recently, which is a great little segue because we have now done our reviews for Inception and Dark Knight the Big Two. So do check them out if you haven't already. We are, of course, doing Christmas in a month, as you can tell by the name above us. And the schedule is as follows. Tonight is the Dark Knight Rises. This Thursday is the return, the Cinema Savvy quiz. And it's going to be about Christopher Nolan films. So we're going to get some more details as the week goes on. And then this Saturday, we have Interstellar. And on Monday, we have Dunkirk. And then we have Tenet, the big one, the one we have all been waiting for. The reviews in the back of my mind right now. Now it's about watching it. We are 9 days away. We'd have seen it in 9 days' time. At this point, this will be crazy. So if you are interested, if you are a Nolan fan, if you're a fan of the Dark Knight Trilogy, if you want to follow us, find us. We're on Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, and on Instagram at Cinema_Savvy. And we now have our own little t-shirt. We have a TeePublic. The link is in the description below. I'm actually wearing mine tonight for a change. I thought I'd put that on. Not that we should have had this big fight one instead, like a Bane versus Batman t-shirt. Who knows? But we do have a couple of store ideas, but no, let's get into this because our Dark Knight review, as we said, Begins and Dark Knight. Every other Nolan film we've done has been like, I love this, we like this, we like this. It's been very nice. It's been, I don't think we've had a streak like this before, which is credit to, I guess, the director that we like 9 of the 10 films as a team, as a duo. But here we are to get into it. So the big thing for this one is easily by a country mile. The first time we saw that, as I've kind of demonstrated, I've had the weirdest Dark Knight watching order with Dark Knight followed by Batman Begins.
Yeah, and, you've done some like weird machete order thing going on with the Batman trilogy. What was it? Dark Knight first, the day after you did Begins, and then you had the 4-year wait until this one. Yeah,
so I'm going to let you go first for this because mine's going to be another long-winded story. So apologies to people watching at home, but it's a very good one.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I did watch them in order. I didn't see Begins when it came out at the cinema. That was on DVD. But then there was massive hype for The Dark Knight, The Joker, everything around it. Everyone was talking about it. And I mentioned about the whole, that was sort of like around the birth of the internet, kind of for me in terms of seeing things on the internet. By this point, it was all a done deal, 2012, gearing up for it. This is the final entry in the trilogy. Everything's coming to a head. And when we see who the villain is of this thing, Bane, my mind starts going to places. There's obviously the main thing from the comic books that we know is coming up, all the posters there with the broken Batman mask, the glimpses from the trailer, and you're like, oh, I want to see this movie. What's going to happen? And you're listening to the soundtrack and everything. I was listening to, I think the track's called The Fire Rises, I think. It's one of and it's like, I don't actually think it features in the film, which is hilarious, but it's like this epic boss fight music. And I used to do this with films. I don't do it so much now. I used to listen to the full sound. Oh, hello. Okay, I don't know what happened with my mic there. I didn't touch anything. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you. You muted yourself. I was so confused. Are you talking about the soundtrack?
Yes, so I used to do this. I don't do this now. I used to listen to the soundtrack ahead of time. It used to be released a couple of days before the main film. And I'd always listen to the music, kind of work out, and in my head try and like fan fiction what I thought how the movie was going to go. So you had that epic music at the end, the fire rises. I thought, right, that's going to be when Bane fights Batman, and then it has like the really sad music as the last track, and I thought, oh God, is Batman's going to die at this thing? He's going to get his back broken. That's going to be the end of the movie. So there was insane hype for it. There was. I remember all the shirts. I did buy a shirt before going to see this one as well, like I did for Dark Knight. And again, it was like probably not to the extent of Dark Knight, but there was an event for this thing that I went to the first screening of the opening day. I think it was 10 a.m. So it was a modest crowd. It was still a big crowd, but a modest one. That night time, I'm sure it was sold out and everything like that. And I was absolutely gutted by this film on my first viewing. And I get this with some films where I sit down and, you know, there's this mad crazy hype. And usually about 5 to 10 minutes in, I know if it's going in like a certain direction. And I got this with the first 10 minutes, like 10, 15 minutes in, I'm like, I'm not liking this film. 20 minutes in, I'm not liking this film. And that continued. And alongside Indiana Jones 4, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, this is the only other movie where before the end title comes up on the credits, I'm up out of my seat and I'm walking out of the cinema because I'm angry. And I went to see this with my best friend at the time, and the entire bus ride back, which was about an hour and a bit, was me just venting, going absolutely nuts, tearing this movie apart. I'm going to try and keep it constrained a little bit tonight. A respectful disagreement between two movie fans. But I hated this film. I watched it once at the cinema. I did buy it on DVD just for sake of completing the Batman trilogy, another Nolan film to the collection, and I do have like all the Batman films anyway. I watched it once when I got it on DVD, and I still didn't like it. And what was interesting was I have rewatched all of these Nolan films before in order, in sequential order from when they were released. And it was this movie, and you even said that it's going to be very interesting to see what you think now after, you know, we've had all these years since, you've had some breathing room from it. We've had countless other comic book films in between as well, to see if I do have a differing opinion on this film. And I don't. I'm sorry to say. My thoughts on this film have pretty much been exactly as they were from day one. And I didn't like it. And it is one of my least favorite Batman films. And it absolutely guts me that this ended the trilogy. But that is my first time watching it. George, tell me about your first time.
So I was in year 11. Actually, let's go earlier. I was in year 10 when filming started, because I remember, I'm going to go again, I was on holiday in Spain. That was the Dark Knight one as well. And I remember sitting at a computer with the little bit of broadband you tend to get in sort of 2011. And I remember 20th of July, the Batman film comes out in a year today. The internet was kind of new at this point. You got release dates, you got titles and names. I remember Batman comes out one year's day, and my friend was like, why do you care? It's a year away. That was a point where the hype starts to build for things for me. I'd never done that ever in my life. This comes out in a year. Never been done. And that night they dropped the teaser trailer. And it had the Liam Neeson voiceover. It had the city. It had "You Have My Permission to Die." It was Bane. I was like, yes, 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 yes. I had seen Inception at this point, but I wasn't fully into the film side of things. I was still very almost at that age. So over that 2-week holiday, I remember being on like the YouTube when I took my laptop on holiday, and there was like set videos going everywhere. There was the Batman chase with all the cop cars. There was Bane in the stadium. I'd seen that they were creating fictional football teams. There's going to be this huge thing, and people were recording in the stadium. I was like, oh my God, what does this mean? They're blowing up a stadium. Bane is talking. He's grabbed someone's head. What's going on? Where's Batman? Blah, blah, blah. And I just remember reading everything about this film over a year. I used to go on like Google News. If any of you used to do that, I'd type in the name of the film. But what new articles come this week? And, you know, from everything from the Tyler Al Gore behind the scenes, which we spoke about before we hit record, from Joby King's interview for spoiling things and everything. And I was on this hype level, which has only been matched by one film, which was Force Awakens. Very different. Didn't look at anything in the build up to that, but trailers. I remember buying like the Empire magazines, getting the posters. I remember when the prologue came online, I downloaded the prologue. Yeah, well, because the IMAXs, you didn't get many at this point in 2011. That was December 2011. We're up to now. IMAX was still very much a new thing. And it was like, there is a Batman I can't remember the film it was attached to. It wasn't Tron Legacy. That was 2010. Whichever film came out in December 2011. Oh, it was Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol had it attached. And I remember downloading it. I was like, oh my God, there's a plane and a bigger plane. And it was just blown away. And anyway, then we get to July. And I go on holiday to Spain every July back then. And I said no, because the date that was booked with my family would have been in the release date, because I mentioned how I missed the Dark Knight, and I was so amped for this, I declined a holiday. Obviously, I'd just turned 16 as well, didn't have a job or anything, because, you just turned the right age to work. I've done my GCSEs. I was going off to college to study film at A-levels. I was so excited. I was starting to watch more and more and more. But this film was coming out, and this was my entire summer. As did you. I listened to the soundtrack before I went in, which I never, ever do. I remember just sitting at my, just listening to it loads. There was a UK premiere in Leicester Square. My friend was there the day before when he sent me photos of there's a giant broken Batman mask in Leicester Square. I was like, if only I could go. I hadn't watched Batman Begins and The Dark Knight for about 2 years as well. The moment this film was announced, I didn't watch them. I used to be able to do things like that really easy. I refused to watch them. I always said I will watch them both the night before, and then I watched them at midnight, because we thought that's what you would do. The film comes out. They don't do midnights in England. Warner Brothers come out saying, the Warner Brothers kind of said they didn't want it because of spoiler culture, which was crazy because midnights weren't really a thing and the internet was still taking off. So we got same as you. We got tickets to the first viewing. Went to an IMAX in Birmingham. As me and a group from school. Obviously, we'd all finished. We'd watched some of these films together. We were big on Marvel. We were the perfect cinema going age. And I was obviously the first 6 minutes. I knew it line for line at this point. I was already excited. And then the film took place. I greatly enjoyed it. Very weird moment. There was a standing ovation, which I had never experienced in my life. And we were all kind of like, what? We're not in America. It was a really awkward vibe, but everyone kind of, you slowly kind of join in. And it was just a very perplexed attitude. And then my friends loved it, and we went home. Obviously, come out of the cinema. Obviously, horrible reasons worth bringing up. You had the Aurora shootings, which was really messed up to a point. That obviously time difference of America, that had happened during our screening or just before, and the reports coming out, so it's pretty grim. But I saw this 3 times in the first 4 days. My parents came back 2 days later from holiday. Went with them. Went with some more friends. Was fully sold. Was loving DC. Had the Man of Steel trailer attached to the film as well, which was oh my God, it's basically Christopher Nolan Superman film.
And I remember looking forward to that film as well from the trailer. That's a different story.
Yeah, I was going to say we've done a watch long to that. That's worth watching. But Dark Knight Rises was an experience, and I didn't kind of it wasn't it was kind of like the prequels where eventually people started to dislike it. And I'm not saying it was very different, not as disliked as the prequels upon first release, but before we hit live, we both spoke. The first negative review was a famous one because it was the first one on Rotten Tomatoes. So everyone clicked it to read it, and he spoiled it in the opening paragraph. Now, I didn't read that, but I did see the comment section of death threats, which was extreme. And
I even received death threats for opinions that I had on the film that I shared. That's all I'm going to say on that. But
it's a combination of not just DC fans but Nolan fans, and I guess combined it was horrible experience for you. I wouldn't do it. I couldn't stoop that low. I've mocked reviews and stuff when it's ridiculous, but death threats has always been to the extreme of the extremes. So now you have the DC fans saying that they don't like the Dark Knight trilogy because it's not Ben Affleck, which is mental. Different conversation, though. I
was going to say, I bet that was my first soiree into death threats from DC fans, wasn't it? Back in 2012, and then Batman versus Superman trailers come out. We'll see what holds in store for us next year when we get the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League. We'll see what happens.
But that's my long-winded intro. That was it. It was a big hype-wise, as I mentioned. This and Force Awakens were probably the 2 biggest ones I've ever had, and probably will have. Ironically, both, one saw everything, one saw nothing, or as little as you could. So very interesting. But I don't know really to take it from here. We're going to have to go into it, aren't we?
I was going to say that kind of sets the stage for where we're going into this thing right from the beginning. So the plot for this thing, in case anyone doesn't know, 8 years after the Joker's reign of anarchy, Batman, with the help of the enigmatic Catwoman, is forced from his exile to save Gotham City from the brutal terrorist Bane. And then I always like to say the ending act of this film is basically just an elongated segment of the sometimes you just can't get rid of a bomb segment from the 60s movie.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Before, should we very briefly mention, sorry guys watching, the inception to Dark Knight Rises, the rumors of the villain, or should we save that for the Bane bit?
No, I was actually going to go into that now. So
perfect.
I was while you were saying that, and I was listening to what you were saying, but I was multitasking. I was reading a little bit about how the idea for this thing came about. So Goya originally had a 3-film draft all done apparently in 2005. I mentioned it a little bit in the Dark Knight Rises one, in the Dark Knight review, sorry, in that Joker was going to be the main focus of the second film, and then I think he was going to scar Harvey Dent at the end of that film, leading into a third film. But Nolan, reading from this as well, and I kind of get this impression with the film as well, it never really felt like his heart was in it. You've mentioned that, I want to make this movie, and if you give me the rights to make this movie, which was Inception, I'll do your third Batman film. It felt very kind of not underhanded, but it felt like he was kind of tapped and he wanted to move on to other things. And it was like, well, I've made 2 films now. I guess I'm obligated to a trilogy at this point. And I think Warner Brothers were probably breathing down his neck as well. The very, very successful Dark Knight made over $1 billion. They want another cash cow. They want another Batman film, that IP and that director. So I think there was probably a bit of trepidation there in terms of, can he even outdo himself? Not that all films have to outdo each other in a series, but there is an element of that. And I think he probably felt that he put everything of himself into Dark Knight, that there is no way that he could go above and beyond that. Not to mention, we need to talk about the elephant in the room as well. I think that the death of Heath Ledger had a huge impact on the Dark Knight Rises in terms of its idea. I think even from Goya's script and probably in Christopher Nolan's head, if he were to ever make a third film, I guess that the Joker would have been a focal point of that movie, if not the main antagonist, but certainly would have had a bigger bearing on the plot. So I can imagine that throwing a spanner into the works and trying to think about which characters will work, which villains can we do now, where can we take the story? And I did read a quote from Nolan there saying about that, what was this? He didn't really want to return to do a movie. He'd get bored halfway through making a film if it wasn't a story worth telling in a continuation. So the original draft for this script, or certainly one of them, was 400 pages long. And watching this film, I think I'd put a gun to my head if I had to sit through because if you do like a minute per page, figure that out. Jesus, no way on God's earth would I ever sit through that. But I do get the impression that maybe a lot was left on the cutting room floor, or maybe they had this huge, expansive, epic story spanning over many, many, many months that they had to whittle down to an almost 3-hour film. They had to keep it under 3 hours. So I don't know. It's kind of a bit of a hodgepodge, really. And it feels like to me with this film, and I guess this is where I'll sort of pass over to you, because I'm just off the cuff right now. I don't really know what I'm saying. I'm just kind of going into it. This was made as an epic conclusion to a trilogy, to a series of films that was never intended to be a trilogy from the beginning. It felt like he made Begins, and even at that point, they didn't know they were going to get a sequel.
Yeah.
He made that as this is my interpretation of Batman, this is what I have to say, this is what I want to do with the character. Eventually gets the idea, makes his own crime film, has Batman in there, has the Joker, majorly successful. And then Dark Knight Rises, even in terms of the titles as well, if I want to be really pedantic, The Dark Knight Rises is an incredibly uninteresting title. It's just like, what? The second movie was called The Dark Knight. What do we call this one? The Dark Knight Into Darkness. No, there's too much dark going in there. Okay, The Dark Knight Rises, perfect. Go picture. This one is definitely more intrinsically tied into the second film, but it feels like it's manufactured to be as big and as epic and tying story threads back into the first film and linking everything together for this big epic showdown to a film series that I never really felt like was designed to be a trilogy. It was more, I have this story, I want to tell it. Here's another story, I want to tell it. Three minorly connected movies, but telling very different stories. So it feels like it's manufactured to be the ending to a big epic trilogy, and it seems a little disingenuous to me. And I think that's why I have that disconnect with it.
That's good, because I was going to mention some of this. So we always talk about the Inception whole thing of, I'll do Inception if you let me do this. I think he didn't want anyone else not playing, directing his Batman world.
Mm-hmm.
We speak about the Burton ones. You got 1 and 2, and the good thing about Joel Schumacher, it was so far fetched from those first two. The last thing you would have wanted was someone to come in and try and make a Tim Burton film. And I've always had this idea in my mind. It's never been proven. This is all me and you hearsay. It's stuff we've seen online. I've always just had this self-belief that he wanted to do more than The Dark Knight. Inception was this 8-year dream of his that come together. Later on down the line, we learned that Dunkirk was a film that he'd written, but he had the idea years ago when he crossed the channel. He speaks about Interstellar, a project by his brother, which we'll obviously get to speak about on Saturday. I don't know how long Tenet's been in his head, but as we've mentioned in our previous videos, that most of his films he's had ideas for years before they ever entered development, and that's why he can churn them out so quick. He's always planning ahead. When you do The Dark Knight, you got the world at your hands, and then you do Inception, it's even bigger. But Warner Brothers, the whole world wanted Batman 3, as they first called it. It had to be made. I wouldn't say it's open-ended, but as you mentioned, it wasn't written as a trilogy. We know that Matt Reeves is directing a Batman trilogy because they've said that from day one. Obviously, we weren't talking film in 05, even 08 really. But as Chris said in interviews, that he didn't know if they'd get a sequel, so he wrote Batman Begins the way they did to tell a single story. Dark Knight, as you mentioned, put everything into it. That was telling a single story. If they wanted to extend it into more, I'm sure there was an idea to do a third, but we didn't get the whole trilogy landscape you have these days. They're making 3 Iron Man films, 3 Captain Americas, double headers here and there, 2 Harry Potter films, and you didn't have that whole franchise. Even The Hobbit to a point, right? That was going to be a 2-part. No, it has to be a trilogy now. And I've always sensed that Dark Knight Rises came into. That's why I think, as you mentioned, the big thing to me is the death of Heath Ledger. I personally believed from day one that I think the reason they didn't kill the character off is because they can bring him back if need be. This is, of course, writing it in 2007 and filming it. No one knew what was going to happen. Same way you could argue Star Wars if Carrie Fisher. They always said that 9 was going to be her film before she passed. Again, like life does get in the way. Things happen. And I've always just had the idea that, Christian Bale does enjoy playing Batman, but he always said, I will always play Batman if Christopher Nolan is directing me in the role. He's got his cast, and I think what's really I know we're jumping the gun here. If you look at the Warner Brothers of the early 10s, Batman's finishing, Harry Potter's finishing, Lord of the Rings is done, but Hobbit's coming, but they're going to extend it. They're in a very different predicament to how they were, and that's why they rushed the DCEU. Man of Steel was a standalone film, we all knew. There was no connections, no nothing, no franchise. And then the Avengers came out 2 months before The Dark Knight Rises. And then suddenly, we need a DCEU. Oh my god, what have we just done? We've just retired our Batman character, probably at this point the most popular Batman on Earth. At that point, one of the biggest franchises on Earth. That we've just retired him in a film that comes out in 2 months. And now we need to set up a DCEU. Long term, obviously, we know what DC are like. They offered Nolan 50 million. He said no. They offered Christian Bale 50 million. He said no to come back. Both refused. We all know Nolan wanted to go on to do other things, and thank God he has, because, of course, I love him. I like the fact he has done this trilogy because from a commercial standpoint and a critic standpoint, Dark Knight Rises just adds on to what he's done beforehand. He's proved himself to, as I keep saying every video, he's proven himself to critics, to the public with the money generated, to the Academy with Oscar nominations and stuff like that. He's proven he's someone that can walk around. Here's I want to make a $200 million film about spies, but you ain't reading the script, Warner Brothers. That's fine. You can make it. He doesn't get to make that, as we said last time, without Dark Knight, and I think Rises adds into that. It's the streak he's on. And I think that does have some things, and I think his heart's in it to a point, but I don't think you have the... I think if you're approaching a third film in a trilogy, it's such a cliche that we've done everything into the first two. Like, what do we do? And I think this is where the villains come into it, because we've done Harvey Dent, we've done the Joker, Scarecrow is obviously a minor, as is Ra's al Ghul. Who are the big Batman ones you got left? You got the Riddler, who was non-stop linked for years.
The studios wanted the Riddler. They were pushing for the Riddler, and they wanted DiCaprio to play him. Yeah. Obviously based on the previous film with Inception.
Oh, he's been in Inception with Nolan. He'll definitely want to... I remember seeing awful posters, and it was basically like the Inception poster meets the Dark Knight poster, but it was like Leonardo DiCaprio in the Riddler's green costumey things. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, Christ almighty. I know it's a big thing, and you mentioned to me Johnny Depp obviously got a lot of rumors at the time as well, which I could see it in a different world, a Johnny Depp Riddler. And then we got the casting of Bane, which I think is a really nice little segue maybe into characters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just going back to the Riddler really quickly, the reason Nolan didn't want to do the Riddler because in his universe, the Riddler would have been too similar. And I think that's probably why the studio wanted it to be similar, because it's the safe, it's the known, it was very successful last time. Let's just kind of do it similar again. As a Batman fan, there is, I'd say probably in the 60s, you know, when you watch the 60s show, the 60s film, the Joker and the Riddler are very similar. They are kind of cackling and laughing all the time. Now in the comics, there is a distinct difference between the two, but I can understand the trepidation there. And it was actually Nolan who settled on the character of Bane. He didn't know much about the character's history, but he obviously, well, did he research it? Because this is one of the problems that I have. So obviously you're drafting in Tom Hardy, one of your big actors from Inception before it. Everyone loved him as the character of Eames. And you're kind of putting him now front and center as the main antagonist from this thing. This is one of my problems. I have many problems, but this is one of my problems here, is that Bane being a villain in this film, because he's basically Bane in name alone. In terms of his appearance, he, apart from like wearing a mask, it's not the same mask. I'm coming at this review from two angles. I'm coming at it from as a Batman fan of that media, and so this isn't me just going to keep constantly comparing it to the comic books. Oh, the comic books did this, whatever, it's an adaptation. I am also going to link this back to why I don't like it compared to the other two Batman films isolated in this trilogy as well. But Bane isn't a villain you pick for this established universe of your more realistic, your more grounded Batman trilogy. You picked Ra's al Ghul, which obviously deals with the whole Lazarus pit and resurrection and immortality thing, which they took that conceit and they twisted it. And I really like that spin that they did on the character, that, you know, he has the name Ra's al Ghul, the title will be everlasting because it will pass down and their agenda will continue. But Bane is a guy who is pumped full of chemicals that enhance his muscles and make him basically be able to rip a wall apart or throw a car. That is Bane. He grew up in a prison, which when we get the initial sort of flashback before we get the revelation, I thought, oh, okay, they're doing the prison story somewhat. That's kind of cool. But he is the intellectual and physical rival to Batman in every single way. He's trained his mind, he's trained his body to physical perfection, and then this drug that he's pumped himself with becomes enhanced. That wouldn't fly in this universe. We've done Fear Toxin, but we got away with that because we made it realistic. But with a villain like that, you don't do it as you wouldn't do, say, a villain like Clayface or Mr. Freeze or Poison Ivy, because it's too out there for this world. So as a result, you're taking that character, but you're kind of stripping him down to the bare bones, to the point where he doesn't really feel like the character now. All the other characters that you cast, you know, the Joker, the Scarecrow, even Ra's al Ghul, they all kind of stay true to their comic counterpart, and there's a lot of respect there for the history of the comic, whilst also doing something different with the character. With Bane, there is basically nothing from him from the page. You do the backbreak scene, and I'll get onto that later because I do have some problems with that scene as well. But it doesn't feel like the character. He doesn't look like the character. There were loads of designs they had for the mask. I remember seeing this. I think it's either behind the scenes or concept art of all different designs they were trying to do for the mask. They were playing around with full face masks and everything. They eventually settled on the one that shows a little bit of Tom Hardy's face. I will give Tom Hardy credit in that he does act through a mask the majority of the movie, and just acts with his eyes, and that is really great that he can do that. Does the same in Dunkirk, in fact, as well. But nothing about the character is like the voice. Almost a separate topic in this review. I'm not going to harp on Batman's voice too much because I had the same problems in Dark Knight, and they do carry over to this one. Towards the end, it does get pretty ridiculous. But Bane's voice, yes, it has become a meme. Yes, it's hilarious to do an impression, and everyone has an impression of the Bane voice. But when I was rewatching this again, I am not intimidated by this guy at all. The voice is hilarious. I don't know if that was Hardy's idea to do that voice. I don't know if it was Nolan. I don't know if it was a combination of the two, but I don't know what thought process went through their head to have a character talking like, oh yeah, and that's meant to be intimidating. It's not. When he's silent or he just like rests his hand on someone's head, that's great. Like all the silence and the physicality and everything like that, that's great. But as soon as he speaks through that mask, and the ADRing of the mask as well, if we want to go back to the prologue, when that prologue first came out, I and everyone else, I think you can actually still find it on YouTube with the original audio, and I watched it a couple of days ago. Can't understand the word that he's saying at all. Like the environment as well, that they open the plane doors and you've got the rushing sound from that. It sounds more natural in that scene, like it is taking place in that scene. But one of the first things that I was hit with when I watched Dark Knight Rises in that opening scene was the ADR dialogue. And it's so painfully obvious that they did it.
I'm going to say it. So Bane, right. It's kind of like we have two sides to every story, which I quite like. Right, I'm trying to bring it back. So big thing is the character of Bane being the choice villain for the third film, as mentioned with Leo and the Riddler. Now, I remember there was an interview with David S. Goyer. I can't remember where it was. I remember seeing it. And he said he presented the idea of Bane to Nolan. Apparently, Nolan had read Nightfall. He's always being mainly influenced by, I think, some Batman Begins, Dark Knight Returns, Year One, and Long Halloween. I think he always said they were the three. And obviously, because Nightfall was early 90s as well. Like
Nightfall and No Man's Land were the big two for this one.
Yeah, and they were a bit, not grown up, but, early 90s. He's a lot older than he was in the 80s reading the others. Obviously, he might have still been reading them, but... And Davis Goyer says Nolan was, well, his words were, Chris was horrified when I showed him the cartoon drawings of Bane. And he basically just said that there was no way that image could work on screen. Especially, as you mentioned, in his world, in the Dark Knight world, the realism world. But he wanted the idea of the physicality as being a key threat to this, because obviously, as we said, if you have another Riddler, it's just another one-man terrorist in that. And if you look at the rogue gallery of Batman, to put them into the Nolan world as such, Scarecrow did a great job. Ra's al Ghul did a great job. Avoided the Lazarus Pit, which is great because it was rumored heavily for this film. Because obviously there was a big green screen in the desert. Turned out it was just the prison, not the actual Lazarus Pit, which would have.
It actually made me laugh in Interstellar with how many mentions they do to the word Lazarus.
I thought to think that, and it was it's Project Lazarus. And I was like, that's it. But Bane's interesting because I like what they did. I said I've read Nightfall years ago, way before the film. I used to read a lot of comics as kind of
a long series. Nightfall's massive.
Yeah, I remember it's and to be fair, comic books are normally timed, so it was nice to get a deep one, but you have to have the build up and everything like that, and it's very delicate because I think it will work for some, not for others. And like I said, Bane's in terms of the A-list villains, he's probably the most recent one. And that's 1993. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Obviously, he got a film adaptation within 4 years. And I kind of, in a similar vein, that you've had the Joker, who can you do in this world? Like, it's not politely, but it's peaked. Heath Ledger won an Oscar. That's way before. Like, the standards are set to a bar that can't possibly be obtained. Maybe that's just performance. Maybe that's also for the film. But the main villain has to follow on from Heath, which is to me one of the greatest individual performances I've ever seen. And you bring in Tom Hardy as Bane. I remember everyone's like, he's 5'4", he's tiny, he can't do it. I remember when them first behind the scenes photos came out. Do you remember when he's like sitting like that?
Yeah.
And oh my words, it was to the point of being as probably big as you could be with it looking. I mean, you know way more about sort of fitness and health than me. The way his body is, it looks like to the point of he's as physical and active as he can be without being a bodybuilder. That's how big he looks. Yeah. When you have those scenes. And he's
like a strongman lifter. He's not defined. He's not you're not going to see a six pack. There is a belly there. There is body fat. He's just big. So it was probably a case of eat all of the calories and lift heavy shit for like however many months before they start rolling and then hit camera.
And I think, I mean, Tom Hardy, he did Warrior. You know, he's had his six pack, his eight pack, he can body transform. You know, Bronson was one, and he looks quite tame not tame in Inception. He still looks a bit beefed up on the snow levels, but he can do body transformations like the rest can. But to me, as good as Bale. And I remember that image, like, okay, I'm sold. And I remember they kept saying that Bane was going to be like a militaristic character. He wasn't just going to be this physically intimidating person. And it was getting used to me of knowing that, okay, this is going to be in the Nolan world. So we can't have someone juiced up on Venom. Ironic, because Tom Hardy did become Venom. But oh god, bad flashbacks. I didn't mind the intrigue of. I remember Chris saying like, we're going to make Bane more interesting than he ever was. He's going to like actually have dialogue. He's going to be seen as not just a military type, but what's the word? Not like a freedom fight, like a revolutionary. I remember a lot of the marketing, they were billing that Bane's a character where you'd agree with his sentiments, which I'll get into later, because this film is very much about class and stuff like that, which you don't get explored too heavily in sort of Batman films. And I was kind of sold on it. And then obviously the prologue came out, and I was like, the voice. I was like, but he looked... I love the mask design. Again, Tom Hardy's eye performance. We'll talk about that probably in a lot more detail next week on the Dunkirk review. But I didn't mind Bane. I do think it's funny, but maybe it's because I come from a point where like I'm happy to meme anything I enjoy. That I find it funny. Like we all know the Oral Noughts videos. He's done a new one about how you should wear a mask. But what I liked about Bane was, and I know it's so different to the comics, which is probably where the clashes do come in with me and you for this film, because it was so different. But in terms of how you could bring Bane into a Nolan world, I think that's the only way you could do it. And I didn't mind it. And I think when you get... To me, what sold it is the fight scene in the middle. The physicality, what they've gone on. To be fair, we know Tom Hardy is small. There's a brilliant thing that I actually researched myself. I think I told you straight away. Because we both love Ben Mendelsohn, who is in this film. I remember Googling the height, because I remember like someone close to Tom, like, you know, Tom Hardy's tiny, we all know that, but Ben Mendelsohn's quite tall. Ben Mendelsohn is about 4 inches taller than Tom Hardy. Yet in the scene of the hand, the framing of it, and I guess this does kind of come into the character of Bane. One of the best things they did was frame every shot of Bane to make him look bigger than what he is.
A lot of low angles.
Low angles, yeah. And I believe they raised his boots, so he was naturally a couple of inches taller as well. And I think the coat makes a big difference too, because it's a long trench coat. They make people look bigger than what they are. I think they did it very well to make Tom Hardy, I guess, look bigger than what he actually is. So I've got a lot of respect for that. But that's the thing more of Bane. I really enjoyed what they did. It felt different, and I know that we won't get a take like this of Bane again. But I think as well, when you take into account how, I guess, wild 1997 was, you know, like the ex-wrestler in the costume, and we do like Batman and Robin, but it was like, make noise, rah. And I know he does become a henchman in this as well, which you are going to bring up.
I am going to bring that up. I hate that. I hate the whole ending with that thing. We're jumping the gun with that, but I remember going on record in 2012, and I still stand by this. Now, the actual persona, the character of Bane, I can't believe I'm going to say this again. Everyone's going to hate me. In Batman and Robin, is obviously, he's just a grunt. He just goes, boom. But in terms of the history, they've got the venom, they've got the look. He is a more accurate comic book representation of Bane. Maybe apart from the backbreak scene and the actual that he can actually talk and string sentences together. But in terms of the look and the venom, if I was going to update it in the Nolan verse, what would I do? I'd still give him the full face mask. I'd still homage that. And there was a design that was like updated, but it had like the white kind of Spider-Man eyes on it designed. If you've seen the original comic book Bane, you know what I'm talking about. I'd probably have the mask with some kind of tubes on it, like a little bit. And if you were good, you couldn't do venom. You couldn't do like the whole building his muscles up and everything like that. Maybe it could be like an enhancer or something. Maybe like an adrenaline kind of shot that spurs him on, that sort of shuts down his pain. You know, like how when you have adrenaline, like you don't feel pain as much, so he can take more punches, for example, or just go into a frenzy some more, or some kind of like smelling salt kind of thing that kind of psychs you up. Maybe that angle would have worked, and you could have just, maybe not all throughout the movie, but for the final fight, certainly you could have done something like that just to homage it. I think there's ways that you could have done it, and they may have been still a little bit out there, but I think there are ways where you could have done something similar but not resorted to the Venom stuff from the comic books. Maybe
my issue with Bane, and this isn't really comics, this is more, I guess, film media. I loved him in Arkham Asylum in the game. Animated series. I don't think he crops up.
He's in the animated series in a couple of episodes. Yeah, he's really good in that, actually.
I don't think he's a character that can work in the film format with real life actors, because I always look at Juggernaut, right? And you know, it's X-Men 3. It's funny, blah blah blah. He's in Deadpool 2, isn't he?
He's CGI in that, though, isn't he?
He has to be CG. And I don't think you can have a human perform Bane to the comics.
He'd end up looking like, do you remember the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with Mr. Hyde in the big...
I've not seen it, but I thought he'd end up looking like Juggernaut from Deadpool 2, because if he's got to be that big, it's going to be CGI, or it's going to be some really creepy like size enhancement of a human on screen. And that's what I think Bane's, because I think he's a good character and I love his place in Batman, especially in the Rogue Gallery. But I think he is one of them characters that it's an almighty challenge to translate to the big screen. That's why I think when they did this, I'd rather they went 180'd and made him their own thing than try and copy a concept which certainly doesn't work for this film. There might be a filmmaker out there, maybe even Matt Reeves wants to do it. There may be a filmmaker that could do Bane. Personally, I think that's too difficult a challenge, especially when you look at other Batman villains. But I think the key thing is they wanted the back break, which are we going to say for a little bit later and go into Batman maybe now? Or because overall, I think Tom Hardy's great as the character of Bane. The voice, sorry, because you did say a lot earlier, I'm trying to remember. If I'm right, I could be wrong. The voice is quote unquote styled off an Irish bare knuckle champion from like 80 years ago, or some really weird.
Bad idea. Bane is not an Irish bare knuckle fighter.
I know. That's why I always find it funnier.
He's Mexican, for God's sake. Get a Latino. Oh God. Okay.
If anyone has seen Peaky Blinders, you will know full well that Tom Hardy's North London voice is also something to behold. He plays a leader of a Jewish gang. All stereotypes included. He's a kind of villain, but good guy in it, kind of morally. But him and Cillian Murphy together was always good fun. Before
we get on to Batman, because I kind of wanted to save him till last, because he's the one
that's fine. Yeah, because that will lead into the next bit. Yeah,
I was going to touch on Talia al Ghul next because she's intrinsically linked with Bane, and then we'll do Catwoman, and then probably Batman's the next best thing after that. So Talia al Ghul, I don't really have much to say because the film doesn't really spend much time on her in the first place. So this was kind of spoiled, as we were chatting about this before we went live. I think did you say the actress who played the young
Joey King? And it's weird because I don't know if you've ever had this. I've had the odd film spoiled and I've forgotten it while watching, but then the twist happens. You're like, oh, of course.
Oh yeah, I had exactly the same thing.
That like you're invested in the film, but then you realize, oh no, I know this about a month ago. But yeah.
So you had that moment as well. You had set photos being leaked, and you had Marion Cotillard dressed in this kind of Oriental, kind of East Asian kind of dress that she's wearing on the Bat Tumbler. So you're clocking that, but I was exactly the same as you. I kind of shut that off, and then when it got to the ending in like the last act,
and as well, the Liam Neeson's cameo was spoiled. He was seen on set as well at similar points. It's like, oh, if Liam Neeson's in it, there could be a Lazarus pit. They're filming in a desert. Here's an Oriental outfit. Oh my God, it has to be Talia. That was, and I think because Arkham City came out the year before, that introduced a lot of people to the character of Talia al Ghul as well, which is probably, it's not coincidental. It is coincidental. It's just, two completely different Batman franchises using the same character. And I'm no doubt that would have been a lot of people's mind of, who's a female Batman character we can name. And that was one that cropped up for the first time.
I just don't care about her story. Now, the whole going back to the League of Shadows thing, to me, it's kind of like, oh, we kind of already did this and we're repeating ourselves from the first film. It's like Star Wars, right? You have your Death Star in your first movie, you do a second Death Star again. Not that by the time you get to a third or fourth in the Star Wars, that's a whole different story, but it did feel a bit cheap. It felt like a ploy. Even the Liam Neeson cameo to some degree, I'm kind of okay with it, but it does feel a bit pandering, and it does feel like they're trying to crowbar this now into a trilogy by saying, oh no, it's all connected, it was all part of the plan from the beginning, and it clearly wasn't with individual stories. But Talia al Ghul in this film is just incredibly uninteresting. She's not given enough screen time to give a real presence in the film. I mentioned this, I think one other time, it feels like she gets venomed at the end of the film, which is sort of always my go-to. From Spider-Man 3, you have like one of you, like a big villain just revealing like the last 10 minutes of the film, and they're just kind of shoehorned in. And it does feel shoehorned in. I think that they should have stuck to their guns with Bane being the main antagonist. I think the revelation that he is ultimately just a henchman really kind of hurts the film, and his impact and his presence at the end of the film just kind of withers away. The focus shifts onto Talia, but we haven't really had, certainly not many scenes of her as a villain enough to care about, and she's just kind of a weak end boss to take out. And not to mention that, but even when she's under the alias of Miranda Tate through the majority of the film, we don't really get many scenes of worth with her. And I'll talk more about this when we get to Selena Kyle with Anne Hathaway, but the relationships in this film are awful. that they're not particularly well written. There's no chemistry between any of them. Christian Bale has 2 relationships in this film. They have to set up one with Miranda Tate, which gets 1 scene, and it feels completely unearned and just really random at the midpoint of the movie. And then they've got to fast track another connection, relationship, whatever it has to be, with Selena Kyle right after. You've got a 2.5 hour, pushing 3 hour movie to set up 2 brand new characters and a relationship and build that and pay it off in the ending. And it just doesn't do any of those things. So I really kind of hate the inclusion of Talia al Ghul in this film. Not to mention as well, the whole, I don't know how the aging works in the flashback with the revelation. So how old would you say young Talia is in that flashback? Should we be generous and say about 8, 9 maybe?
And Tom Hardy
is he's Tom Hardy in that flashback where we see it in the revelation. So I don't know how old Marion Cotillard was during this film. Like, I don't know if she's in her late 30s or whatever. I don't know how old she is, but I'm trying to work out the age of Bane in that. Would that make him kind of like 50, 60 or something?
That's the one thing, like, you know me, like, I don't jump onto like cinema sins. I'm not into that, but this is the one that has always hit me on day one. I was like, oh wait, that's Tom Hardy there. I was like, but that's not Marion Cotillard. And it has that's the thing. Do you remember John Harrison from Star Trek?
Yeah. Oh no, really, guys, he's John Harrison. Yeah. He's totally not Khan.
Miranda Tate was maybe even worse than that because it was too obviously it had been spoiled, but it was actually was it more obvious than Khan? It probably wasn't actually. But the Miranda Tate was like, here's a very generic name that is generic of generic. I know it had a Rachel Dawes. But, like, you know, you've cast Marion Cotillard, who's obviously won Oscars at this point, who's just been in Inception in his film in a very important role. And she's not just going to play some, not even side. She's in, like, what, probably 3 scenes before the turn at the end. And
yeah, she's introduced to the reactor. There's the board scene, and then the scene where she goes to Wayne Manor. Yeah, about 3 or 4 scenes.
And it's very quick. And you mentioned the relationship-wise. I'll get to Catwoman later. I'd really like Anne Hathaway and Christian Bale together in this. If this one, Marion Cotillard feels very... I mean, I love her. I think she's one of the phenomenal actors. Love her work. It feels so... Inception worked. Let's bring Inception cast back because we do get another one, which I'm sure you'll love. But it's definitely... Of all his films, even since, like, you know, you didn't get half the Dark Knight Rises cast end up in Interstellar. You didn't get half the Interstellar cast in Dunkirk. You haven't had half the Dunkirk cast come in Tenet. It's been the complete opposite. He normally 180s his cast, and the Inception to Dark Knight Rises was the jump where all of them came in, and you know it's got its perks. And obviously they were made back to back 2 year span, which is incredible still for a $250 million film. To crank that out in 2 years is quite remarkable, I think. But yeah, I think that's one of the issues I have with. I think Marion Cotillard was too big a name to be a surprising sudden villain at the end. And the Raja, it's what you mentioned. It's going back to being a trilogy where, okay, now it has to be a trilogy. We need to end this. Let's bring it back to where it began and have it was them all along, which I understood. I love the Liam Neeson cameo. It's a nice throwback. It's neat. And it was the whole, you know, immortality can be anything, Bruce. I liked that design. I like the fact that you didn't even try and cast Liam Neeson playing when they have like a mini flashback. They have like a young Liam Neeson actor.
He's convincing. He's convincing.
Yeah. And it's that whole debate of, you know, let's not just motion capture everyone or just try and like de-age the actor with makeup. It was like it worked because you didn't think it was him until it was really obvious it was him. But I'm trying to think where to go next. So, yeah, Marion Cotillard has a weak point. Obviously, you get the death scene as well, which is ironic in its own right.
When you mentioned that she's an Oscar winner and she's won Oscars, I was like, that may be true, and she is a fantastic actress, but I tell you what, she ain't winning no Oscars for that death scene in this film, because to this day, it is, oh God, it's probably up there with one of the worst death scenes I've ever seen on screen. It's really bad. It's the whole...
And it's the build-up like that.
Like,
you have a great little like chase in the build up, and you get tension and stakes, and you get the whole like, you know, they have like an end theme for the villain in the Dark Knight films. It's like when the train crashes, when the Joker falls down, it's like here's the Dark Knight Rises one, and you know you get the truck crash, slam into it. It's like here's the final boss defeated, and it's like it's just a cough. Like I always laugh. I don't know why. It's not. It is funny. It is funny, but
it feels so amateurish.
It's just weird. And they just leave her there. Like,
yeah, that's moving on now. Yeah, just leave her there to rot. But as a director of Nolan's caliber and an actress of Cotillard's caliber, because she is a phenomenal actress, she's brilliant. I don't know what happened. I don't know who looked back at those dailies and said, yeah, that we don't need to go for another take. That's it. You've got it. I don't know if they were rushed for time. I don't know if they wanted an early lunch. I don't know what it was, but that people laughed. People actually laughed in the cinema. And you shouldn't do that to the death of, like, well, I won't even say a big villain, but your big antagonist at the end of the movie. It's like the full-on head tilt, and all it needed was like the tongue lolling out as well, and it would have completed the image. It's always just stuck in my mind as one of the worst things, and I think a lot of people, even people that like the film, call it out as well.
It's like it's shoehorning, because she has a couple of words, which is basically the I can flood the chamber, and it's like, we can't have her drop the revelation until this, but we've already killed her. So what do we do? Because I love the speech with the twisting of the knife. Gotham. I love that little scene.
The music's great in that scene as well.
And then it's just like, and then it's like, oh, okay. And then it's like Lucius Fox, like, I need to get out of here, run. Like, it feels like it was add-on, like, okay, maybe it hasn't worked for how they want to film, but it feels like probably a decision that they probably weren't keen on either, politely put. Because as you mentioned, the director of that caliber, I've not seen a scene like that in any of his work. Maybe except a couple of lines in Following, which is 1997 on like a 20K budget. Well, I know less than that.
But the experience he's had up until this point, which we've reviewed and which we've talked about, even his earlier films, you didn't get.
It sticks out like a sore thumb.
It does. It really does. Anyway, shall we move on to another Inception?
Okay, you want to go to Kevin?
I was going to do the two love interests, but if you want to go to Joseph
Gordon-Levitt, when they cast on, so firstly, I think everyone has quote a Catwoman. I think that's a big thing. I've never been really a fan of Batman Returns. Yeah, his Returns. I had seen it at this point, but I was never into the weird sort of leather thing. And I know a lot of people love it.
I am.
I know I'm like a minority with this, and I was never a massive fan of Catwoman in that, which was always a bit strange. But I've never been a fan of the character, to be fair. I did like the Batman 60s one as a kid, though. But I don't know if it's because it was like Kitka, and like it was the way he's.
There were three actresses as in the TV show and the movie, amongst all three of them. They were all great.
I think it was more the way he used to just pronounce Miss Kitka. Like, I don't know why. But anyway, Anne Hathaway, I love her in this film. I think she's great. They needed, obviously, a female interest because, obviously, they killed Rachel and Dana, which no one saw coming. Again, it's further signing. It feels like, okay, we're going to end this character. He needs an arc. He needs a life. He needs a family. He needs away from Gotham. So who can we bring in? And you get Catwoman. I think it was a very obvious casting choice at the time. Now, she had just been cast as Black Cat in Spider-Man 4. May it rest in peace.
That's true. Yeah.
And when that film was cancelled, her schedule was, I believe, then freed up to film Dark Knight Rises. So that came due to that. There's a scene of Carl. Again, in the Nolan world, she's looking for the clean slate, which is, as Ben Mendelsohn puts it so wildly, where you can be removed off every database, blah, blah, blah. Is it too good to be true? Is it what they use in Inception to clear Cobb at the end? Is it connected? We don't know. But she's just, I don't mind her in it. I know she's a supporting role, but I know she's not I know she's integral to the plot, but I know she's not going to have the importance that Rachel does. And I know she's not going to have the importance that Bane or Batman does. So I never minded her as a supporting character. Now, the love interest stuff, I think the scene where it's Bruce and Selena at the ball is great. The ultimate trailer line, there's a storm coming. I love all their stuff as that, and they seem to have less chemistry when they're suited up. Maybe it's because costume superheroes don't work as well together in the Nolan world. Like the whole like no guns thing. This isn't a car. The fight. I love the tunnel scene when she sets him up for the trap. There's a great little duo bit there. But I was never really sold on the Catwoman side of things, and suddenly she wants to get away and she 180s, and I know ultimately she betrays Batman and then she redeems him by saving everyone and stuff. But it's a weird character, because I know you're probably the 180 viewer on this. I enjoy the character, but I know the criticisms of it. But I don't mind it from my experience in this film.
Obviously, taking Michael Caine out of the equation because he's always great. She is my favorite thing in the film, although I do have some problems with it. Going back to the Michael Keaton, Michelle Pfeiffer thing, and this, I swear to God, this isn't just nostalgia talking. If you watch some scene, and there is a ball
once.
That's
there is
fair.
a ball. I remember that, but yeah.
So I always wondered, because this was in the trailers, wasn't it? The storm is coming line. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, I wonder if that is a sort of like homage to those earlier Batman films, the Tim Burton ones. Pfeiffer's and Keaton's chemistry in that film is undeniable as Selina and Bruce, and especially as Batman and Catwoman. The dialogue's actually, some of it's a little bit on the nose, but I think it's actually very well written, and I think both of those respective actors and actresses play it very, very well. I'm very torn on her character in this one. Number one, for a start off, I see this character as Selina Kyle. I don't see this character as Catwoman. It almost feels like the movie's too just embarrassed. It's like calling Superman in Man of Steel. It almost feels like they're too embarrassed that they're doing a comic book movie and they don't just call them by their comic book name. You know, you get the goggles that fold up into the ears, which is a cute touch. I like that, and that's probably a reference there. But is she only called Catwoman in like a newspaper headline clipping or something like that? Or is it the cat burglar they call her or something like that?
There's the thing when she like I think she's trying to like kill Ben Mendelsohn and she's like, "Cat got your tongue."
Oh, I forgot about that line until I rewatched it. I was like, you again, like Cats did that as well. It's the most obvious cat pun you can do, and anyway, I like how I like how she plays the character. I do like Anne Hathaway in this moment, and I like her actually probably more when she's out of the costume than when she's in the costume. She looks great in the costume. I'm not talking about that, but I love the moment where she's talking to British actor from Torchwood. I can't remember his name. He played Torchwood.
It's the bar scene, isn't it? With the
she gives him the fingerprints, and it's like when the cops break in, and she just snaps. As she says in the movie, she's adaptable. She snaps into like hysterical screaming, like she's just a passerby, just someone in the bar who happened to be there. And then when no one's looking, her whole demeanor changes and she gets out. Love that. You get the bit as well where she's the maid at the beginning of the film in Wayne Manor, and she's playing the part of this sort of, you know, innocent, sweet little maid. And as soon as she gets called out by Bruce Wayne, her whole performance, love that stuff. That's great. That's exactly what you want from Selina Kyle, and she plays that very well. I don't think the character's particularly well written in terms of her dialogue. I think it's very clunky, and how she plays it as Catwoman, I don't think it gels well with the universe. Again, the Nolanized universe, it feels too out there for what's been established and how people talk. And I actually disagree with you on this. I don't think that Christian Bale and Anne Hathaway have good chemistry in this film, because I don't feel like they're given enough time really to establish it. You throw Marion Cotillard into the mix, which, you know, muddies things, and then pretty much for the entire second act, the characters are apart from each other, and they only reunite for like the last 15 to 20 minutes. And when she kisses him at the end of the film, it almost feels as out of place as Finn and Rose Tico's kiss was at the end of The Last Jedi. It just feels like, whoa, what's happening here? Like, this has not been set up. I will say that probably Bruce and Selina, there's more grounds there for something than there is for Bruce and Miranda Tate in the film, because they only get the one scene and there's a few more in this. But it's just that really awkward, flirty dialogue, which, yes, is needed for a Bruce and Selina character and dynamic to work, but it just feels kind of out of place in what's been established in this current universe. So I'm very mixed. I think she is my favorite part about the film, but I still do have a lot of problems with it, if that makes any sense.
The kiss is interesting because I think you can still get the ending scene at the table without the kiss.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need them to blatantly kiss as Batman and Catwoman as a fond farewell. I know it's to hold big up the explosion. He's alive after all, but you could have just had her. I love the scene at the bar again. We'll obviously get into that later on, but it just works with her just being there. That kiss is needed. That's very Hollywood, isn't it? It reminded me of you know, Will and Elizabeth on the boat in 3. It's like
slow motion
camera. Yeah, it's the camera spin and everything. Whereas in this one, you got Gary Oldman. They're like, who are you? Still.
Gary Oldman just third wheeling in that scene while they two snog it out before a bomb's about to explode and destroy Gotham, but we still got time to snog each other's face off for about 5 seconds. Like, okay, every second counts, but all right.
I can see why off this film he brought back into Interstellar, which I believe is that the only, except Michael Caine, is that the only Dark Knight Rises cast member to be back in Interstellar?
Oh yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think so.
But I liked her in this. Obviously, I'm gonna have a different conversation in Interstellar as a bit of a hint. But who are we moving on to? Should we go to Joseph Gordon-Levitt?
Let's go to Joseph Gordon-Levitt. So I hate this character. I hate this character.
He's playing Arthur from Inception in The Dark Knight Rises. He's a hot-headed young cop. He plays by the rules. He knew who Batman was because it's what he says, pretty girl under your arm. It reminds of like Jim Carrey out of Dumb and Dumber. Like when he gives the story about how he works out he's Batman, it still makes no sense to me at all.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there with it. Yeah,
I think you can have the role of the cop wanting to get Batman back to have the interaction with Gordon without knowing Batman's identity. But then I guess it's more of the how do you get Bruce to choose this cop to be the one. It's a very awkward situation to be in because of what they try and do at the ending. I don't mind him in it, but that is the most of more than Marion Cotillard. That is the most bringing the Inception. And I love Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I think he's a great actor. He hasn't done. I mean, this year he's dropped 3 films, but he's had a couple of years out. I think he's been raising his family, but he looks like he's on the way back in. So hopefully, maybe he'll crop up in the final scene of Tenet. Who knows? He hasn't aged. And that's the thing. Like he can play a hot-headed cop, even though he's in his 30s. He does suit that role, and I like where we're following him for the Gary Oldman stuff, I guess, more than anything. But it's with the ending they choose to do of passing down the torch, which we'll get to. I think his stuff could have worked perfectly just with Gordon, maybe better than if they'd have brought the Bruce stuff in. But I can understand why they wanted to try and bring the Bruce stuff in. But certainly his scenes of Gary Oldman are the ones I like best. He's very two-dimensional. And it's always the line of dialogue. I think I said this to you before you rewatched it. The construction scene where he accidentally shoots the guy and it's the screaming like, who are you working for? What are you doing here? But it's the proper like New York, like the proper New York accent. And I always laugh. It's not meant to be funny, but I just find that. But I love his scenes. Again, trying to get Gordon when the bombs go off. That's probably one of the highlights of the film, to be fair. But I don't mind him. But the ending was it was a polite Easter egg that I think went a bit wrong from a very personal, honest standpoint.
Polite Easter egg.
I think it was just a harmless one-liner, but I don't think the gravity of the one-liner was intended. And I think the way it's come to the world is very different to probably how they intended it as. I think it was meant to be a wink-wink, and it ended up being a complete no.
That was I'll get to that, but that was the part that broke the straw that broke the camel's back for me. So I was hating life. We got to the ending montage. Things were happening. You know, Batman was dead. Like this was happening. Michael Caine was crying. Okay, that made me feel sad because it always makes me cry when Michael Caine cries. I don't like seeing him cry. And then it's like unfolding, and it's like Robin. And I was hating every decision. And when it got to that point, I wanted to walk out at that. I was ready to walk, and I thought, no, come on, it's the ending music. I know it's only got like 2 minutes to go. Let's just get through it. And then even after that, there were more points that annoyed me. But that was the one. Okay, let's wind it back. So Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character in this, John Robin Blake. I didn't mention this about Selena Kyle as well. I did think her character was kind of unnecessary to the film. You can kind of take her out and the film doesn't really change inherently all that much. It felt like fan service putting her in there. And I kind of have the same thoughts for Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character. Very unnecessary character. If he is going to be in the film, I agree with you. If he was just sort of the understudy, the right-hand man to Commissioner Gordon, the kind of plucky new cop, and he was being taken under Commissioner Gordon's wing. And then when the revelation comes out, that it's like the Insomnia thing, right? It's like the Hilary Swank thing with Al Pacino, that she looks up to this guy and then some news comes out, they work something out, completely shatters their reality on who they thought they were, this idyllic leadership figure that they had. I like those elements for what they are, but I do think he is a very unnecessary character, and especially when he's just kind of basic. He doesn't really have many layers to him. He's just there. He hogs so much of the screen time. If you took him out of the film, you really could have just devoted it either all to Gary Oldman, who is one of the many characters in this that just gets sidelined with nothing much to do. He gets injured very early on in the film, and then he's basically in a hospital bed for the majority of the film, and then only does kind of menial thing towards the end. If you got rid of Blake, I think you could have devoted that time to Commissioner Gordon and fleshed his stuff out more. You could have given us more Batman stuff, Bruce Wayne stuff. Anything, you could have devoted that screen time away to something else. So John Blake and the orphans and the priest there. I'm sorry to say it. It makes me sound like a horrible person. I don't care. Every time they're on screen, I just do not care about what's going on. The scene where he awkwardly shoots two guys and he feels bad about it, and he kind of has this like look of horror at his hands and drops the gun. They're trying to do like a whole reason why he won't use guns when he becomes the next Batman, and it's just so forced. There's so many things about this film that feel forced to me and feel easy and not like Christopher Nolan's previous MO, with everything being meticulously thought out. It feels like, let's write this 10-second scene in here because the plot needs it, because it needs this ending. It just feels quite sloppy. And I may as well jump to the ending revelation with him. I've already mentioned the name, but the fact that this guy is our next Batman, nothing in this film sets us up for that moment. And it's actually kind of laughable when you start bringing it. Bruce Wayne leaves coordinates and leads him directly to the Batcave in his last will and testament, because Bruce Wayne is dead apparently at the end of this film. We'll talk about that when we get to the character of Batman. And you've just got Joseph Gordon-Levitt just kind of awkwardly, confusedly walking around the Batcave, not knowing how anything works. Bruce Wayne had 7 years of ninja training in Nepal with the League of Shadows, which set him up to be Batman. This guy is a cop, doesn't know how the Batmobile works. Is there a Batmobile? The Batbike? Everything. What's going to happen? I don't. And then it's like the big dramatic reveal where you're meant to standing ovation or cheer or whatever, that when the platform rises up, like, yes, that's Batman rising. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is our next Batman, or possibly Robin, or possibly Nightwing. We don't know. And it's just terrible. It's just the worst ending ever. Because if the thing is, I'm jumping all about with this. If Batman wanted to stop being Batman, I don't like that decision, but that's fine. He could fake his death. But why did he also have to fake his own death of Bruce Wayne? Why did it have to be the two? Wouldn't that raise eyebrows? Wouldn't people go, well, isn't that awfully convenient that the time that Batman dies, Bruce Wayne also dies? The amount of time that Bruce Wayne hasn't been seen, Batman also hasn't been seen. Like, he could have just gone back to how he was at the beginning of the film. He could have stayed as Bruce Wayne, but he didn't have to sort of off himself with Batman. That's jumping ahead to Bruce Wayne, but I don't like so many of the supporting characters. I just don't care about in this thing. And just what I'm going to throw it in as well. Like, I love Ben Mendelsohn. His character's called John Daggett, which is a weird kind of nebulous reference to the animated series and even the comic books. I think there's a character called Roland Daggett who is tied into the origin of Clayface, of all people.
And he runs a construction site company.
And I was confused to decisions. There's so many decisions in this that, you know, go against the Batman lore and everything like that. I know you could make the argument as well with Commissioner Gordon's kids in the end of Dark Knight, how he basically just has a daughter in the comics, Barbara Gordon, who grows up to be Batgirl. He technically does have a daughter, but the primary focus is on his little son at the end of Dark Knight, who are just conveniently written out of this movie in like a sweeping line at the beginning. But the fact that you make John Blake a nothing character with no relation, no tie-ins to his character history, and you've got the Robin name drop in there, that was just a middle finger to everything, to Dick Grayson, to Robin, to Jason Todd, to Tim Drake, everything. It was just, I hated it. Absolute character assassinations and just wiping your ass with the entire 80 years of Batman lore that came before it.
See, I still don't mind. I just think it's
over to you.
I can't really add too much more to the Robin discussion because what I will say is, for those of you that may not have been on the internet at this point in 2012, do seek out people's fan fiction Robin armor photos they did of Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I don't know if you remember seeing them.
Yeah, I remember.
There were some really good ones, but everyone was like, no, they're not doing it. Like, that's not ever going to get made. It's meant to be a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Life goes on, Batman goes on. But like I said, I'm not saying it's been blown out of proportion, but I think the way they interpreted it and wanted to do it, I don't think had the landing, I guess we could say, with the audience at home. Maybe
and
that's probably
fast forward to the future as well. Arkham Knight, I guess I'm going to spoil things. The ending of that game had a very similar ending to this film, in that, you know, like the death of the Batman, he's a icon, he's a symbol, everlasting, and they kind of have this weird thing at the end of that game where Batman's possibly still alive, but we don't really know. There's some kind of spectral vision of him out there somewhere. So, I mean, this ending, I do think, did have an impact in the greater Batman legacy that came after it, and that you are having media doing a similar kind of the death of the Batman type thing.
I'm trying to think if it's a good segue. I want to talk Batman, but do we need to very quickly chuck in? I mean, Morgan Freeman has nothing to do. That's polite.
Exactly. Another one of my biggest problems with that.
I don't mind it. You know, it ends at Dark Knight, man on computer giving us an audio commentary. Don't mind it. Alfred, I think we must touch upon. Or do you want to do Gordon first?
Oh no, we'll talk about Gordon. I honestly don't have much to say on Gordon that I haven't already said. I just think he's kind of sidelined. I don't think he's given much to chew with. There's a scene where the revelation comes out where Bane talks about the lie, the cover-up that they did with Harvey Dent, which is a good scene. I do think the dialogue there when he's talking about shackles and everything like that, I'm like, no human talks like this. You're trying to be really up yourself with your writing here, and it just didn't seem natural. Didn't quite get what he was going on about with that thing, but it's a shame because I love Gary Oldman in the first film, but obviously he's just starting out in that film. Dark Knight is definitely his strongest film with the more interesting character stuff, and I like the conceit about the cover-up being realized and being told to the public and how that image is changed of Gordon, but then they kind of don't do anything with it, and he's just sort of standing around in groups of people and tracking trucks. And I think his greatest accomplishment at the end is climbing into a truck to unhook a bomb, and that's it. That's all he does in this film, and it's a real shame because you got the amazing talent of Gary Oldman, who's fantastic in these films. He's one of my favorite characters in the first two. He's just reduced to doing nothing.
I've been different. I love him in this because we kind of said in the big interview that he, to me, after Batman, he's probably got the best arc of the trilogy because he peaked in Dark Knight. And I say peak, you know, he got his promotion. Let's be honest, that's the main thing, right? He's finally Commissioner Gordon, a film and a half in, and you know, they mentioned at the beginning he's got 8 years of peacetime. And obviously the wife left home. He lived with the lie. Of course, any sensible wife would not stay with their husband that's refusing to tell the world Psycho tried to murder their kid.
Could you imagine that like breakfast conversation the morning after in The Dark Knight?
Could you imagine
a guy with like a half scarred face just like held their child at gunpoint and they're just awkwardly like, so
yeah, like, do they make the kid lie in the courts as well, like about what happened and stuff? But the one thing I always have with this is that they make out Gotham's clean, and he kind of plays a frizzled older commissioner, which is I think what they wanted to portray, that he's had nothing to do for 8 years. It's a trailer, isn't it? The mayor's going to dump him in the spring, said by the guy that actually plays Thomas Wayne in Joker. And I love. The Bane speech is great because the intercutting, scene-wise, that's probably my favorite. The film, the fucking hands clean speech thing's great. Like you get proper Gary Oldman there, like with this sort of quiet but loud screeching at them all and stuff. And it's more his work with Joseph Gordon-Levitt I like, but the ending to me sells everything. And it's when I first watched it and I cried. And it didn't do it this time actually, which I messaged you about. We'll talk about Inside next week. I think that's ruined all my senses. The revelation, which I know we disagree on as well. The Batman's, you know, Gordon says, I never wanted to know who you are. Does he say that I've never wanted to ask? But he's like,
I never cared for who you were or something like that. But shouldn't the city know the man who tried to save them or something like that? Which is that scene in isolation is one of my favorite scenes. It is played beautifully until the clangor of one line.
See, I love this bit because Batman's got the great speech of it could be anything, even as I can't. It's really bad. I don't know the whole line.
Doing something as simple and reassuring as putting a coat around a young boy's shoulders to let him know the world hadn't ended.
That's the one. And then you get the cut to the Batman Begins footage.
That's good.
And the music. The music kicks in, and it's a split second of. It's like almost they speed the coat pat down and Gordon's smile, and it cuts back to then closes into that loud music, and it's the Bruce Wayne like question to himself. And this is where we disagree. I love that. You had to say it because without saying it, the audience won't know Gordon's thinking it. That's the only issue I have.
That felt really easy. I think they will no, but I think there's I like the ambiguity with that because we've had this discussion as well. How many coats around young boys' shoulders would Gordon have had to have done in that line of work? How many devastated children from deaths in families and murders and horrible things? So he probably says that, and there's probably hundreds of incidences in all like the years that he's been a cop. So I don't know how that one moment there he just goes Bruce Wayne. It just feels like an unnecessary line to me. It was just that oh no, the audience isn't getting it. The audience is dumb. The audience is dumb. Just like reconfirm that it's Bruce Wayne. So he's thinking about I don't know. If
he'd have thought maybe the Lamborghini scene from Dark Knight, it would have been. I don't need too many flashbacks of it, but if it could have like had a little quick montage of Bruce skipping the red light to save the city lawyer, things like that, I don't mind it. It worked, and I cried. I don't mind admitting that. It's a nice little ending to Gordon's arc, and then I guess jumping forward very quickly, you do get him at the Bruce Wayne funeral, which is also a nice little tag to that moment.
And quoting, I did want to bring this up. You mentioned earlier towards the beginning of the review the fact that this deals with like class structures and everything like that, poor versus rich and everything like that. One of the big inspirations from this was a Dickens novel, actually, A Tale of Two Cities, where it takes a lot of its themes from, and the ending eulogy that Gordon has at the funeral is a direct quote taken from that book, which is kind of brings it nicely full circle. So this is almost another book adaptation in many ways, because there's so many themes and elements that are taken from that novel, that source material, and implemented into the story for this film.
And I've not read that book, so I can't lie, but the class stuff is really integral to this. It's something I overlooked when I was not a bit younger, when I first sort of watched it. It's not something I've noticed over the last few years, where it's actually gives you a different look at Gotham. It wants to put you in the perspective of the prisoners and things like that. Different conversation, because we need to talk about the one and only Michael Caine.
We do.
The trailer. He cries in the trailer. We all know there's going to be a scene in which there is a misty-eyed audience, and it had to be. It's one of the best scenes of the film. They made it so intentionally done in an echo, so you can have the entire echo of the mansion. The crying of Bruce Wayne. Those two. I mean, we've spoken Begins, Dark Knight. They've got such good chemistry together, that those two, that it feels genuine. It feels like Bruce Wayne wants to kind of kill him, like a dad argument. It feels like Michael Caine knows he's lost him, like he's lost his son, and it's a great scene, and I think has a big input onto obviously the scenes that follow. But in terms of emotional, this is certainly the best Alfred scene of Batman as a character. And maybe the funeral scene, because I cried at that too.
Yeah, it's just every time he cries. Even in Interstellar, when I was rewatching that, and there's the scene where he's on the deathbed and he's crying, I'm just like, oh, don't cry, Michael Caine, please, for the love of God. Even in Muppets Christmas Carol, that gets me misty-eyed at that moment as well. See, I'll agree that Michael Caine absolutely nails this film. I'd say he's the best, chief among them, and then like Anne Hathaway, I can tolerate. I quite like her character. Everyone else just kind of whatever. I am torn on Alfred's characterization in this film. I think it's played very well. I think Caine nails the material that he's given. It does feel like a complete 180, though, from his character in The Dark Knight, and I don't quite understand it. So in that film, there is a quote where, the Joker's wreaking havoc, and Bruce Wayne says, like, I don't think I can be Batman. Like, this is too insane. I can't get involved in this thing. And he says, endure, Master Wayne, take it. That's the point of Batman. He can make the choice that no one else can make, the right choice. You've got to be steadfast. The world needs Batman. And he hasn't been Batman for 8 years, which I'll discuss when we get onto Batman himself. But the moment that someone else comes back and is threatening the city, this time he's like, oh no, like, don't be Batman. Like, that's a horrible idea. Like, you want to commit suicide by being Batman again. And it just feels the continuity with Alfred's character doesn't really continue from The Dark Knight. It feels like they've completely switched his characterization. He was never really the naysayer in any of those two previous movies. He was very much helping him. He was very much, he understood where he was coming from, why he needed to do this, why he was the only person that was doing this. And then all of a sudden in this movie is like, I never wanted this for you. You only see one end to your life. You're suicidal. This is going to kill you. I always wanted you to settle down. I never wanted you to come back. And he plays it beautifully, and it is very emotional within the film. It's just that continuation of Alfred's character where it kind of drops off a cliff a little bit, and that I'm getting very mixed signals from Alfred.
I don't mind it. You got to think there's an 8-year gap. And obviously we know the whole Rachel death and stuff like that, and Alfred burning the letter, which I'm glad that is kind of brought up, even though it's not very clear if Bruce does believe him or not. Mm-hmm. It's the how dare you, like, I love it. I don't know why. I don't know, because if you think, though, if Bruce has been a cripple for 8 years, which they very much want to establish from the get-go, he's a magical device, which I would love to have if I ever lose access to my legs. But you've got to think that if Michael Caine is this father figure, not just the butler, he knows full well that Bane is going to absolutely annihilate Bruce. We know it as the audience. It's been marketed, but they need to sell that within the film. And to have your associate, the father figure, say, I can't follow you down this path because there's only one way it's going to end to. I don't think if Alfred was all chirpy, he could. I don't think it would work for what Bruce is trying to do with Bane. Alfred could have just fetched him and brought him back to the mansion, but Alfred's done. He knows exactly what's going to happen, and I don't think it doesn't feel like it would have felt weird in Dark Knight, but I think because you've had the time jump, him not being Batman, him being injured, and the fact that obviously they're trying to build up this physical threat of Bane. What to say, he's a man not to be trifled with, or something like that.
His speed, his ferocity, like he's giving highlights on a boxing match or something.
I love the CCTV. I mean, I love the whole bank sequence of when he just annihilates everyone. Does he punch someone through the helmet?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
But I like the whole the Alfred's knowing full well that you're done here, Bruce. Because I think his character would be like that. If if he was fighting Ben Mendelsohn, then Alfred's going to be like, knock him out. But I think in this one, he knows full well what's going to happen. I think he's just there to increase the stake of Bruce's loneliness for that moment, kind of.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I just wanted to bring it up, but I do think that, as I mentioned, like Caine, those scenes get me. That and
it's definitely written for Michael Caine. I mean,
his voice cracks when he says, like, "Heard your voice echo." Through the house, and he's like choking. Oh yeah, no, okay, I take it all back. Back.
It's the funeral. It's when he's like, and then he's like, I failed you. I was like, that's what got me.
I do think it's really fucked up of Bruce Wayne though to do that across Alfred, an elderly man that's been there the whole time, and not to tell him just so he can have an ironic reveal at the table. He just happened to be sitting there at exactly the right spot at exactly the right time.
He did say he goes there every Friday on holiday in the summer, so maybe Bruce went there every Friday for like 6 months in the hope he came back.
Did he say, like, precisely at 2:17 in the PM, I sit down at this table closest to the exit and order a 30 Branca or whatever it is. But anyway, we need to get onto Batman. And this is going to be my longest spiel, so strap yourself in.
We're an hour and 20 in, we're nearly there.
I know, I'm conscious of the time, I'm looking at the times, but if you've made it this far, folks, you know what you're getting in for with these kind of reviews. And also kind of for you, because I'm about to waffle on a little bit here. I'm going to try and keep it as brief as I can. This movie begins 8 years time jump from The Dark Knight. That is my first big problem area with this film. We get told that Bruce Wayne has been a shut-in. He hasn't left his mansion. Now, we did have a bit of a debate on that because you said, like, no, he has been out and everything like that. They say he hasn't been seen at all. Like, he did, like, the nuclear thing relatively early on. That was it. And then he hasn't been seen when it went bust. He's just isolated himself. Batman's done nothing. He hasn't been functioning for 8 years. This film didn't need an 8-year time jump, and I think the film kind of hurts itself for doing that, because one of my biggest problems with this trilogy now, when you look at it overall, and which takes away a lot of the elements that this film deals with, in that Batman being broken and, physically broken and everything, emotionally, to the point where he's got nothing left. The impact of that is taken away because we haven't seen Batman in his prime. We've never had a period where we've had Batman in his prime. We had Batman Begins, where he was first starting out. You can't really call him Batman at that point. He's still working a lot of things out. We have a year time jump, and we have the events of The Dark Knight. So relatively not a long span of time, 12 months of him still trying to be Batman. I'd say we get Batman in his prime, or starting to see that, in The Dark Knight. But then apparently right after that night, we had 8 years of nothing. So we've never had like an extended period where Batman has been operating in Gotham functionally at all, really. And I think that really hurts it, especially when we get later on into the film and Bane shows himself and we have the fight. And I'm going to jump onto the fight scene now because, number one, I don't think it's well choreographed. There's a lot of punches that really do not land, and you can really tell there's a lot of questionable choreography. That's probably one of the things that's consistent over the trilogy that I don't like, is how some of the action scenes are filmed in terms of the fist fighting with Batman. He never really strikes me as someone who's had 7 years of ninja training and mastered every single art of fighting. He is just kind of left hook, right hook, right hook in all like the fist fights. And we see that in this as well. Going to the comic books with Nightfall, the whole point of it and why Bane is successful is Bane's very smart in that I think in the comic books, I might be wrong about this, he just lets all the criminals out of Arkham, and Batman spends months, I don't know how long, an undetermined amount of time, fighting and putting away all of these criminals. And then by the point he's put them all away, he is exhausted, he's got nothing, and then that's when Bane attacks, where he's got him, completely at a weakened state. But nonetheless, the impact of Batman falling to Bane in that comic book is decided on the fact that this is Batman in his prime. Even Batman in his prime, yes, he's a bit tired, yes, he's a bit lethargic, still couldn't beat Bane. But when you get this and Batman is not in his prime and has been out of the game for 8 years and really isn't Batman and is just kind of like a weak old man, anyone could beat up a cripple. And it kind of takes away from Bane's intimidating factor as well, that Bane's not really pushed to the test because he's just a pushover. Like, you could just push the guy and he'd fall over essentially, and you've won the fight. So I think that the 8-year time jump hurts it, because if this had just been, Batman's still been in operation, he's been trying to stop criminals, but he's also got the outside effect of the police constantly chasing him now, as we saw at the end of Dark Knight, which I thought was a really awesome place to end that second film on, which would take you into interesting territory. We do get a fairly good police chase scene in this film under different circumstances, but I don't know. I think that just kind of hurts the character there. So that'll be my part one of my Batman rant, and then I'll get more on to the ending, because otherwise I'm going to be talking for like half hour straight. So that kind of brings the fight into question as well, I guess.
So I'm the opposite on the fight. I think it's the best choreographed fight of the entire trilogy by a country mile. I think you have everything intimidating about Bane. You've got, as sort of set up by Alfred, the rest, you've got kind of Bruce Wayne's arrogance that he thinks he can just be Batman again and win. And Bane knows. I wouldn't even say Bane's trying to get him in his prime. Bane just wants rid of him for projects, whatever the plan is for Gotham. And I think he knows he's going to bat him. Everyone in the room knows he's going to batter him. The whole thing is Bane toying with Batman. I don't think it's meant to be the even fight. I think Bane knows he's catching weak, which is why I think it works so much better. When you bring in the not the Raja Ghul, so the League of Shadows, Excommunicado, trying all his tricks, things like that. I was born in the dark. I love the fact that Bane could just end everything Batman had learned that was an advantage, because it was kind of like someone wreaking the most desperate moments. Is the fact, he's trying to hide in the dark with the EMP. He's then trying to distract him, and Bane's having none of it. So I think it's addressing. I get where you're coming from with the whole, he wants him in his prime. I do think Dark Knight is the prime, but then maybe this goes to the tangent. But the 8-year gap, the main thing, the 8-year gap is that the whole point of the Dark Knight is Harvey Dent is what Batman can't be. He can show his face and he can put the criminals away. And it's the lie they live with. And I know that's going to be a massive issue of yours, is that Batman went to choose and live with the lie. Now, I think it works for what they wanted to do in this film. You die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Batman doesn't want to be Batman forever. Dent even kind of says that in the table scene. And Bruce Wayne knows it too. He just wants to save Gotham, and by putting everything into Harvey Dent, obviously it makes him corruptible as well. He took the fall for his deaths. But the whole 8-year gap, I think that's more the fact I think he was trying to adapt Dark Knight Returns to a sense. Obviously, that's got the Joker, and they couldn't have had the Joker. It's a weird mishmash. I think my issue is if you had a smaller time jump, I don't think you'd get the impact of, they called the Dent Act, where we locked everyone away for 8 years. They had absolutely nothing. Like, if you want to tear the city down to its limb, if someone was wrongly put in jail for a year, that's bad. But 8 years of no parole is quite something. So I've always seen the time jump more for that side of things. And also, obviously, Bruce's sort of physicality, that naturally he wouldn't be what he is in 8 years. Because I know where you're coming from with the Batman character, and it's very different. But I think it's more the interpretation of this Batman character in the sort of the realist world, that he can't have a prime for X amount of years as he often does in the comics and games, which, no issue with that. I love it when they do that. But I think for what they wanted to accomplish with the realism, I think that the time jump did work better for it. And the Bruce Wayne thing, so from what I read, he is around. So Miranda Tate says that 3 years ago, someone basically found out how to weaponize the project, and then you disappeared and lost all your money. So the way I've seen it is that Bruce Wayne was around for a couple of years, not Batman, just Bruce Wayne.
5 years then. Okay.
Yeah, then he just disappears. Obviously, the moment Dr. Pavel refused someone's offer. So that's where I've kind of... Because I didn't know that till the last couple of months as well. I always thought that would be weird if Bruce Wayne did dip, but the more they go on about the energy projects, and it is a lot of exposition, that's what I've always thought as well. It's the fact that, obviously Marion Cotillard's in the long game, because she's obviously been plotting energy projects for maybe as many years too. But they're certainly patient, the League of Shadows. I'll give them that.
This might be jumping the gun because I do have part 2 to talk about Batman. It's a critique that comes in 2 halves. But you mentioned there about the exposition, and I thought this when I first saw it, and I extremely thought about it when I was watching it this fairly recently before we did the review for this. The editing is so choppy towards the beginning of this film, and I really actually kind of hate it, especially the bit when we get to Wayne Manor. So you get like the epilogue almost before you get like a little mini prologue where it's the ending of Harvey Dent's speech, and then you cut to the main prologue. I even think that prologue is confusing to a new viewer, because if you look at the prologue to the last film, it's just a bank robbery and the Joker's behind it all. Keep it nice and simple, and it's effective. This, you're kind of having to like play catch up. Like, okay, we've got a CIA man here. We've got these like militia who are bringing in this wanted man called Bane and a few of his other henchmen, and we've got a guy here called Dr. Pavel, and we've got a corpse here, and we're blood transfusioning blood from Pavel into this corpse, and it feels like they're doing too much. I always thought that. But when we get to the Wayne Manor stuff, you get a series of scenes where it's like 10, 20 seconds, cut, like deliver the line of exposition that you need, cut. And it does that so much. There's a bit where I think it's Daggett's first scene, actually. He just goes, we all know that Wayne's peeing into masonry jars. It's very good for you to invite me on the grounds. Cut. And there's no time where scenes just get time to breathe and just be scenes. And like the first half of that movie is kind of that for me. Slows down a little bit in the second, and then it starts to get choppy again as we're gearing up for the final act. And you've got Gary Oldman doing something, and then it's cut into that guy who gets suffocated by Bane. There's a bit going on there, and it gets really choppy. And I don't know if it's because this was a longer film. I don't know if it was scripted as a longer film or if it was shot as a longer film and cut down.
There's always been talk that there was, quote unquote, a 4-hour cut. Now, we all know that every film's first cut is longest. Mm-hmm. I remember specifically seeing for so long talk of a 4-hour cut that this would be 3 hours. I know this is 2:40 around that point. It's still long, but I still feel that there is time missing. And the thing is, what we know as Nolan fans, obviously doing Nolan month, he doesn't do deleted scenes. He always says the film I'm putting out there is the film I've made. The things I'm not showing, the things I do not show. But there was always rumors. Even I don't have it anymore. There was this Ultimate Dark Knight Trilogy box set that came out about 4 or 5 years ago. And everyone's like, oh my God, it's finally here, the extended editions. There was that scene of the Joker from The Dark Knight of him on the bus. There was so much. There was Bane's origin. There was this, there was that. And they always spoke about Dark Knight Rises having so much fun. You can tell they've cut things because it's a so obvious 3-arc structure. But Arc 1 is about 45 minutes. Arc 2 is probably about... Oh no, so I'd say Arc 1's about an hour. Arc 2 is about 30 minutes, and Arc 3 is about 1 hour as well. Mm-hmm. It's very, Act 3 is the moment that it cuts to snow, and you got Tumblr, and Act 1 ends with Batman's back being broken. That's how I've always seen it. And it's more the stuff in the middle with the cops and Bane's rising, but that's where it feels quick. I feel that time is lost in there. Certainly Bruce in the prison, which I know you're going to speak about as well. That's time is so quick, and just cutting to snow is like, okay, let's just show time has passed. It's just changed to Christmas now. And
it's the jump in geographical location, especially with regards to the prison. And there's a bit with Bane as well. So you have the bit where Bat broken, and I think it fades to black. And then it cuts back in, and we don't really get a sense of where it is. We assume it's in the Middle East somewhere. There's a desert there. There's a little town, and it's to do with the League of Shadows. League of Assassins. That's what it's called in the animated series. The League of Shadows. I assume it's the Middle East, and everyone's talked about it. How the hell does Bruce Wayne get back from there back to Gotham? And I think a lot of people are like really apologetic about it and just saying that, oh, well, there's tunnels, and you start writing your own fan fiction of how Batman got back. And that's lazy to me. That is not the sign of a good movie. I'm all for ambiguity, but there are certain things in the plot when they establish that that city's under lockdown, that all the bridges have been blown. If anyone enters that city, they will nuke the city. And then all of a sudden, Batman just saunters in down the road and there's no sense of explanation. That's very lazy writing to me. That's like, we need Batman back for the final act. Let's just write it in. Who cares? Moving on. We've got to get to the final thing. And that's what I get with this film. Again, I was just going to say it does the same with Bane as well. He drops him in at the jail. There's literally a scene transition later, and Batman and Bane is back in Gotham in the boardroom to surprise Morgan Freeman and Marion Cotillard's character, and he's just standing there in his jacket. It's like, wait, how long did it take to get there and come back? So I do think a lot of the sense of time that they were probably going for is lost in this, and maybe it would be better with a 4-hour cut. I think that if it was going to be 4 hours and you wanted to do an intermission, if you put an intermission right after the fade to black after the back break, it doesn't matter then, because an intermission serves as a period of time before you get to your act 2. So I do find the pacing of this film very choppy, but at times also very plodding, and especially the second act just slows to a grind for me. It's just kind of a lot of characters under lockdown really not doing anything, which maybe work for a narrative, but it doesn't make for an entertaining movie.
What I was going to jump in with, you mentioned him getting into the city. My biggest pet peeve, and as I said earlier, I'm not big on Simpsons. I don't look for like explain. But the one thing that sticks out to me as a sore thumb, which I just can't not look at, not turn a blind eye, but the one thing where I started thinking, okay, this is too much for me, is the death by exile. I love Cillian Murphy's cameo. I put it in there. It was a lovely touch. He's got the whole like tattered robes as well, like very Scarecrow-esque, but it's the moment where they establish very quickly the guy from Torchwood dies, and it's a great death. It's actually quite terrifying, and I love the concept of them. You're free to leave, but you're walking over in ice. What really gets me is when the whole board, the Wayne Enterprises board go out. And I love the little weird, like, fang, the new bat symbols, like the fang ones, where I don't know if it's a sleeping dart or it's killed them, who knows. But the one
thing, Batman doesn't kill.
Yeah, one thing
who he kills.
Well, the one thing that's always got me with this is, oh, look, a flare. Light it up. Where did you come from? They've established that no one can cross this, but you're already, like, on the bridge. And, again, stuff like this doesn't normally annoy me. I'm saying, like, they're now further out than the Torchwood guy, but they're now throwing flares and setting flares alight, and they're not on ice anymore, they're on land. And then it's the Bat Bridge. Like, I understand the concept that he needs to be a symbol, he needs to inspire all the police, I understand all of that stuff. But time being relative, how important they strive, they are so... It's the bomb goes off tomorrow. It's a recurrent theme. The whole bridge thing, the bomb's about to go off, everything, the bomb's going off tomorrow. The one thing that takes most, and again, I understand it, but you managed to paint the bat symbol.
Logistically, like, how do you go about that? Is this like this is a big art attack, like Neil Buchanan from Art Attack, if anyone in the UK remembers that?
And you know me, like, things like that wouldn't normally annoy me, but that's just one I can't avoid. And it's the tension you get with Gordon on the ice and the others. And it's just like, why is Batman there? How did he get...
Let me rewrite this scene then, if you want, because I get the whole point. You need that visual symbol for people.
Oh, just get the bat light.
Exactly, that's what I mean. So, like, at the end of the film, we know that Bruce Wayne's repaired the bat signal. Move that to that point. Have him, like, off screen. It's more, again, it's wasting time kind of thing, but it's more in the realms of possibility for me that Bruce Wayne patches up a broken spotlight than he does painting oil on a building and trailing it all down with, like, a kerosene can all the way across the ice. And here's the thing, right? If this was in a heightened Batman world, that scene
would look stupid.
Annoy me. But you can't do how does he get back into Gotham? Oh, well, he's Batman. Nolan has established that this is a universe where you can't just say it's because he's Batman. Everything is planned. Everything is realized. Everything is given an explanation. And that's another reason why I think this movie kind of falls on its arse a little bit at the end, is because There's a lot of things in this movie that are just convenient. You just throw your hands up in the air and you just say, oh, we'll go along with it. It's a comic book film. But you can't do that because the rules of that have not been established. Had this have been a heightened world, say this happened in even Batman v Superman, I'd have been like, sure, add like another stupid thing to the list of things in that film. But if it had happened in, say, Batman Forever or Batman and Robin or even the Tim Burton ones, I probably wouldn't call it out because it has that more.
I think I would. Even on them, it just feels too.
It's too much. No, it is too much. It is too much. I think they could have just done like the bat signal and the image of that in the sky. That would have been a nice callback.
Or like a mercenary or someone of Bane's on the thing like they did in Falconer.
Yeah.
But I said, it's a pet thing. It's a minor thing, but it's something like that can take you out.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's how important they go on about the bomb going off and no one believes them to then we've got enough time to paint the bridge.
They break their own rules, essentially.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I know they just want to get to the finale because you do get the great follow-up scene of silence in the streets, all the cops and everything like that. But yeah, I'm trying to think. Is there any other Bruce Wayne things? Because
part two. I'm just going to sort of get on to the end of that. So, in terms of those inconsistencies as well, the magic knee thing. Again, another thing that you can't just do. It's a fiction. It doesn't. It's not a thing, and you can't just do that because the rules have been set. The big thing for me is number one, the back break. And then they just start dragging his body. Now, I'm not a medical expert, but I think I know that if someone breaks their back, you can't move someone at all, or if you only very marginally, and they just drag him because you could paralyze someone. But they transport him over to, lower him down, whatever. And it's there is a vertebrae protruding from your back. It has to be put back in place, and you just punch it. You just punch a bone back into place in the back, and he just says, hang like this for a while until you can stand and you'll be fine. I don't think that's how medicine works. I don't think that's how that works. And I think that punching a vertebrae the conditions don't look that great. It doesn't look like anything sanitized. They don't have any equipment. They're using ropes. They're using very crude things. Again, you can't do that in this world that's been created. And it becomes all very predictable at the end. It's, Batman's weak and he gets beaten by Bane, but then he's got to trade. It's basically your plot to a Rocky 3 or a Rocky 4, really. He goes against the odds. He gets beaten by it. You have your training montage. He comes back bigger and stronger, and then somehow he beats the bad guy at the end. It is all very formulaic. It's very paint by the numbers, which I think hurts the film as well. Even in terms of a Nolan film, I think it's probably the most just easiest played out one. Go on, sorry. No, go on.
What you mentioned then, it being easy, we kind of said in Dark Knight that if you look his entire filmography, I believe Dark Knight and this are the only two that are actually in complete linear order. Yeah. And certainly this one being the final entry in a trilogy, final act, it's as painted by the numbers you can get. And I think sometimes, certainly Game of Thrones, bad comparison, but some series when you reach that end point, it just gets too obvious and too easy. You understand why, because they need to wrap it all up. But compared to how they handle the first two, because even Batman Begins to a point, it's quite linear towards the ending. There's more going on, but this one is the most painted by the numbers. You've had this. I'm not going to get into him because I know you hate the character, but Matthew Modine randomly playing a coward to then have his one moment and then dying again. Let's talk about
the character just hogging screen time, doesn't need to be in the film, have no connection to him, don't feel anything when he dies. It's just a waste of screen time.
You could merge that and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character together.
And you'd have probably felt maybe a shred more with Joseph Gordon-Levitt because he had a bit more to do in the film. But again, just pointless bloat. Just cut it all out and keep it streamlined. But the whole rope of climbing out of the pit, we see someone fall and it snaps and we don't see them, so I assume it kills them. That would outright kill someone, not to mention someone recovering in rehab from a back injury, a spinal injury, and he falls twice and snaps on this rope and it looks really painful. Not only would that kill someone, that would just completely dismantle his whole recovery process. And all of these things are just jumping out to me because it's too out there. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense in any film, let alone a film that's prided itself in its realism. Anyway, jumping through to the end now. So Batman comes back and he starts punching Bane's mask. Who'd have known that was his obvious weak spot? If only Batman had 7 years of ninja training and had mask. Oh wait, why didn't he punch the mask in the beginning? Why is this only a new thing now? Why is he just going for the mask? Because it's only like a slash of like a backhand with a gauntlet which severs the mask. Oh, if only he'd have done that first in the first fight, that would have played entirely differently. I don't know why he didn't do that. It's very cliched. Let's just get through the second fight. The second fight is fairly unremarkable. It's kind of awkwardly framed. They look awkward in the costume in the broad daylight. Terrible dialogue. Sorry, as well. Screenwriting. It's like, so you came back to die with your city? No, I came back to stop you. And it just feels like two kids playing with like a Batman and a Bane action figure and slamming them together.
The music's great.
The music's great. It's a shame. I really wish they'd have used the Fire Rises on the score, because that to me has more impact behind it for like a final showdown. I don't know why that isn't in the final film, or like parts of it maybe are, but it's been changed. But then with like the Talia al Ghul reveal, which we've already talked about, you kind of strip away any intrigue that you have with Bane, and then he's just one-shotted by Catwoman.
I don't mind that.
It's a very lazy death. It just takes me out of it.
I get that. I don't mind it. You know she's going to come. It's like the aliens in Toy Story 3. Like, you forget they're there, but they're going to come back, and you know they're going to save the day. Because I do like the bit where Bane just kind of says, like, we both know I can't let you do that, as in wait to die. So I like the fact she came back in, but I get why people do have issues with it. I don't mind it. I think it worked for what they were doing, because especially now they've established him as a henchman, he doesn't need like the kind of glorious death he would have had if he stayed as the lead villain. And if he was the lead villain, how do you kill Bane? Yeah. I think there's probably another way to do it. It's just it just feels very offhanded and just very it's played for laughs as well. I think that's the big thing. It's played as a comic joke that you just take him out that way. But then we get onto the ending and the whole thing that Batman looks like he's going to martyr himself and go out in a blaze of glory. I don't know how the nuclear bomb works, by the way. Is there fallout from that thing? Would all the residents of Gotham die of radiation poisoning? Because it doesn't look like it was taken that far away. But it says that it's clear of the bay. I don't know about anything about nuclear bombs. And it got to the end, and I did kind of feel it. I was like, wow, they've killed Batman off. They've done it. You get the moment where you have like the statue revealed that everyone, they're holding memorial for Batman. He's held in high regard. And I actually probably would have preferred that ending. Seeing what we get afterwards, I would have preferred the whole thing that Bruce Wayne sacrificed himself, because that's the big thing and the big takeaway for me with the ending, and why I don't like the whole reveal that he's still alive. Not to mention that he's still alive, he's quit being Batman, and he's just shacking up with Selina Kyle in a cafe in Italy. It doesn't make any sense to me from the standpoint that Bruce Wayne is one of the most recognized people. What is it? You're Bruce Wayne, the Prince of Gotham. You'd have to go 1,000 miles with someone who didn't know your name. Now someone's going to tell me that Italy is more than 1,000 miles away from the US and it counts. I'm just not buying it at the ending at all. I don't see him doing that. And not just in terms of Batman never quitting in the comic books, in terms of like the vow he made to his parents and everything like that, to constantly, eternally uphold, the innocent and champion the people. But even in terms of the continuity of this trilogy, beforehand, in the first film, he makes that vow. He's going to do something that no one has before. And at the end of that film, he says, maybe when I stop being Batman, it's kind of a naive thing. That's when I'll settle down and have a normal life. And that's when we get to the Dark Knight and we realize with terror like the Joker, he will never have a normal life, because Batman has to be here to stay, to stop criminals like the Joker. And then you just kind of knock that on the head, and intrigue, that character development that we've had since Begins and the Dark Knight is kind of all undone in the moment, where it's just like, oh no, Batman just wants to stop being Batman and saving people and everything like that. Because just because Bane's defeated now doesn't mean that in a few years someone else might not want to have another crack at taking over Gotham or something like that. It just feels very easy, I think, added to the fact that I don't feel any chemistry between him and Selina Kyle. Selina Kyle doesn't seem like the settling down type to me, but maybe neither of them are. So maybe they're just kind of making the best of a bad situation. But it just feels to me, it's like, look how they massacred my boy in terms of the character of Batman. You're taking all the concepts of that character, what that character stands for, not just from the comic books, but from what's been pre-established with him so far, and you're just making him quit. Batman never quits. And that's my ending to part 2. The thing is, Batman doesn't quit, but they've got to end a franchise. It's done. It's the final one.
Did they have to? That I mean, couldn't they have just ended it with him still being Batman in Gotham, and you just end it there? You don't have to end it so finally that you kill Batman and you kind of kill Bruce Wayne and you end everything.
But you end it so finally that no one's going to say he can come back.
And that feels like it's the reason that they did that. It doesn't feel like it was done from a story standpoint. It feels like I don't want anyone else meddling with this thing. To be fair, with how it ends, they could have brought him back out of retirement to take on.
It'd be the same thing because, like, oh look, you came out of retirement to fight Bane. Now you come out of retirement.
I know. But
it's more to me. I don't mind it because obviously I know they use the word rises, but they always said this is it. This is the final one. It's now a trilogy. This is it. It reaches a point where you do have to retire Batman. Like, don't get me wrong, like comics come and go, but there are so many reboots of comics and reboots of this and reboots of that you get arcs which get left open. And sometimes it is good to say goodbye, as Kylo Ren would say, let the past die. Ironic, we know. But I think in this realistic world they go on about, he knows he can't be it forever. He knows he shouldn't deep down have come back. Of course, he does save the day, just about, but he does speak about, in Begins, he speaks about that day where one day he'll want to settle down. Says it again in Dark Knight, that day is coming soon. Harvey Dent will be why I can stop being Batman. And I essentially kind of have it. It feels like an end game. And not film as in the actual wording of like an end game. It feels like, it's done. Gotham's saved. The nuke's gone off. That threat's done. His bow's been tied. Bruce Wayne is dead. I like what they do with that. I think it works for ending a trilogy because there's no way they can bring it back now. But you got to think that would be running through their mind. Like, we're getting Keaton back apparently in the Flash film, which, don't get me wrong. It'd be cool to see Mark Keaton. I know you're a much bigger fan of him than I am.
I just want him to have his own film. I didn't realize it was going to be in the Flash. I just want him in his own film.
And it's just, and don't get me wrong, Christian Bale in theory could come back in 20 years' time. He won't, but sometimes it's nice to have finality. And I know that we do speak about, like things like Star Wars that do go on. Marvel certainly goes on, and people can't stay dead. You get prequel films about dead characters and stuff. And it's nice to look back. Granted, it was 8 years ago, and somehow it's been 8 years. It's just nice to look back and say, okay, it's done. Nolan did his Batman trilogy, and I think he almost ends it with himself being like, let's retire this character now. And for Bruce Wayne's arc, for Alfred's arc, he wants to have his own life. And I think it does work for the reason. I know it's different from the comics. Batman wouldn't stop being Batman. But when the comics, have they ever had him dying or closing out the Batman role?
He's probably died many times in different stories. They always keep resetting, don't they?
And that's the issue, is that there's always a reboot. And what happened within 3 years of this film, 4 years of this film, there was already another reboot. And now we've got another one 4 years after that. And obviously in 2012 it's different, but I think as time's gone by, the decision to kill him off screen, I'd much rather have him have a quote-unquote controversial ending in Dark Knight Rises than have him appear in the Justice League. The Justice League that we got, that he would have been in. I think it's nice that it ended on that. And I don't know, maybe it's just different perspectives on it, but I've got no issue with what they did to Batman in this. And sometimes it's like, we were talking about Spider-Man, we got Spider-Man 3 where he doesn't stop, but it really got to Spider-Man 6, it would have been done. He would have retired after Sinister 6. And I think for film franchises, they do deserve goodbyes. And I think it was, I guess, the most Nolan-esque way of doing it. He fixed autopilot, he sacrificed himself, but he didn't actually. It was more about keeping the symbol, the bat light and everything. And
the editing of the autopilot scene is very confusing because it cuts to a close-up of Batman piloting the bat, and then afterwards the bomb ignites, and I just don't think he would have got clear of that blast with how it's edited.
In 2012, people used to think that Superman saved him and it was teeing up for Batman.
I remember that
was a good rumor, I'll give him that, but looking back it would have been stupid. But it's just the whole, maybe it's non-linear storytelling, who knows. Maybe the self-eject button was like the quickest self-eject ever seen to mankind. Like it was like the rocket in like Interstellar. He just sent him into space. I can let it slide because to me it ended it, so I don't mind that.
That's fair. Again, just two separate sides.
And that's the thing. Like we don't have minds for each other's throats. Like we don't mind each other's opinions because it has been discussed this film a lot over the years as well. But I'm all character out. Are we going to power through the last bits? Because we've covered pretty much everything.
We knew it was going to be long, though. We knew this was going to be a long.
Yeah.
Favorite scene for me.
I'm not going to go into detail. Do you want me to do mine first?
To be honestly, it's mostly the emotional scenes, as we mentioned, like the Michael Caine scenes. I love. There's the apart from that one line at the end, I love the coat around a young boy's shoulders scene. It's mostly just that sort of stuff for me in terms of favorite scenes of this thing.
I love the bombs, the Bane's, the whole after the back break from the moment the American football game starts to his closing speech outside Blackgate Prison, which I love. I like the montage when they talk about Bane being military, being a revolutionist, being someone on his side. The montage of his own court system. What did they say? Rip them from their decadent homes to all the rich people. And I always like that vibe. It felt like not that the plot was intensifying because it already had, but it felt like, okay, this is the grand plan, and I can see why this is happening as it is. So I always loved that. Scene-wise, I don't mind the chase. The emotional scenes all work. I love the prologue. I just remember, again, it was seeing the bigger plane. That was probably the most Christopher Nolan moment of the entire film, was the plane stunts. It's like, how do we steal a plane in mid-flight? Well, we just get a bigger plane to steal it in. Very James Bond, but and to me, probably the best in the entire film is Fight One. I love it. I don't know why. I just think it was no music, right stakes, sound, grunts, everything. You could have easily put a big bombastic Zimmer score on there, but by having nothing but like pain for Bruce, I think worked to that scene's credit.
I don't know if we mentioned that in the Dark Knight as well. I sort of thought about it after we finished the review. We talked about the whole car chase, the Batmobile chase, and Batpod chase in Dark Knight. No use of music in that scene as well, or very marginally in some scenes, but nothing during the first fight. It would have been interesting to see what it would have played out like if you had, say, like the fire rises over that first fight scene or something like that. But it is cool how you have like the interior of the cave and everything like that, the water and the chains. And it makes you focus more on the impact of the hits, really, doesn't it? So I can see why they didn't use that. But the music, let's talk about the music. So this is solely Hans Zimmer's score on this one. There's no collaboration on this one with James Newton Howard, although he does still use some of those same. You still get the emotional beats like the flashback scene to Batman Begins footage and everything like that. It's kind of more of the same from Dark Knight. There are parts where it just seems like he's just gone into that soundtrack, taken that track, and just implemented straight over. The new themes really are the whole Bane chanting thing. Was it Deshe Bassa or whatever it is, means rise. And that's played a lot throughout the movie. And then you've kind of got a theme for Catwoman as well, which is this very slinky, played on a piano kind of one, which I absolutely love. I think that's perfect for her character. I love that song. Other than that, I'd struggle to think of any inherently new themes. Is that kind of low, growly, tensions rising kind of song, which kind of ties in with the Bane theme whenever he's planning something. But they're sort of like the only new themes that I can think of for this one.
The Bane, I love the Bane theme. Obviously off the back of Inception, I think James Newton Howard said that he just kind of put his hand in it. He says, what you did on that is something that I basically, he kind of just politely stepped out. Maybe he felt like a third wheel. He probably did, but he was always there from day one to mainly do the Bruce Wayne side of things, and his themes to me are kind of done. This is all about the Zimmer for this one. It's the big action beats, the set pieces, the Bane chant, everything. I think I love the score for this. I don't know if it's the best out of the three. Maybe on par with Dark Knight. Again, it's more the Bane side of things that come into it, but it's still a fantastic soundtrack to me. And I love the Catwoman thing. Very underrated. Not many people talk about it. I'm glad you brought it up. But
what's interesting is the copycat scores that came out after this thing. Looking at you, Mission Impossible Fallout, where it's basically the Dark Knight Rises score again, isn't it?
They even have a prison breakout scene like the Dark Knight as well, don't they? But I think Zimmer's great, and you can see why. Again, off the back of Inception, you can see why. Because Chris did always approach Zimmer. Before Begins, he originally approached Zimmer. Zimmer brought in James Newton Howard, so I think the trajectory was always going to end up with this being a complete Zimmer score, and certainly for the scale of the film, I think it suited that too.
Mm-hmm. I think we need to. I don't know if there's many Nolanisms to talk about in this one. In all honesty, you get an ending montage. Music. It's like it plays out like a music video. I still think Inception did it the best, but he's got one consecutively now in all of his films from this point on. mostly it's the cast. The cast return, which we've already talked about. There's that element, as I mentioned earlier, the whole like Pacino, Hilary Swank dynamic with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Commissioner Gordon. There is a twist in there. Not so much of a great one this time round, but there is that moment, that reveal. And they're kind of the only ones that I'm thinking. There's probably a bunch more, but they're the ones that are standing out to me.
It feels, as I said, like the most linear, like the least Nolan-esque. Obviously, IMAX I always bring up. I think this had about, I want to say about 40 minutes of IMAX, which obviously had a big jump on Dark Knight. Again, he's getting more technology. There's a very famous behind-the-scenes video of the stunt double of Catwoman's driving down the stairs, and she takes out a $500,000 IMAX camera. I mean, it's like Wild Afraid. We'll just get another one. Yeah, there's not as many in this. As you've said, it's mainly the cast, the music, it's the vibe. It feels like Inception carried on with a new. You get like those films and series called like anthology, where it's the same cast, a different story. It's very much along those lines. One thing I would say, it's kind of not very Nolanism. I really wish he would do some more films of Christian Bale. Christian speaks very positively of him, and I know that Michael Caine has reached this point of. He gets put in every Nolan film, no matter what, even if it's radio dialogue for one line. There is something about Christian Bale that, because The Prestige is great, this is definitive trilogy, and to be fair to Nolan, he does pick his cast very importantly. He's like I said, he hasn't brought that many back in recent films. The films that followed this, I would really like them to collaborate again, because as Christian Bale said, they always ask him about Justice League, and it actually winds me up now. And he always said, if Christopher Nolan would ever do it, I would have come back in a heartbeat. To me, that reads more as not I'd be Batman again. That reads to me more as I want to be in another Chris Nolan film.
And doing 4 films together as well, it's a lot in relatively quick succession as well. They're definitely, that creative process of director and lead actor, I think they would definitely have collaborated on a lot of stuff. And we've seen how good he was in Prestige as well, like another role that wasn't Bruce Wayne. So yeah, I second you on that. I'd love to see him return. But yeah, I mean, they're kind of all the Nolanisms, but I think now we should probably just sort of wrap up final thoughts, but also like the impact that the trilogy had as a whole, really. So for me, it's kind of, I mean, I do love this trilogy. Like, I'm not going to say, well, I love the first 2, but the impact that it had is undeniable. It completely reinvigorated Batman in a new way. I think it was the way that Batman had to go in terms of the big screen. It has kind of reached a point now where I have seen the hyper realistic side of Batman. Now I'd like them to take the tone and the elements of that, but start adding that more heightened quality into it, maybe to get it close. The Arkham games and the animated series are what Batman is to me, and I'd love to see a film tend more in the Arkham games direction. But I mean, the impact of this is undeniable in terms of not just the filmmaking, which is unparalleled. It's incredible in this trilogy, especially for a comic book film as well. Within this genre, it really hadn't been done like this before, and its approach and its take from directing to script to its realization and everything like that. But also the casting. I think even now, there's a whole generation of people that says Christian Bale is my Batman. We've had 2 Jokers after this, but people say, Heath Ledger is still head and shoulders above the rest. Commissioner Gordon, we've said we don't think we'll get another Commissioner Gordon that will top this. We have had one for one scene of Justice League. Maybe you'll get more next time. But there are so many memorable things, iconography. Even Bane. Now, he's not, in terms of like comic book, what I would consider Bane. But if they were to ever do Bane again on screen, I think a lot of people would have the voice and the look and everything like that. The score as well, in a lot of Batman media, even the games, even sort of like with Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL's input with the Batman that was to follow, very similar sound now to the kind of soundscape that you get with Batman. And that more realized militaristic take on the combat suit and the Batmobile. So it has had a massive impact in terms of the future Batman mythology that came from it, but also in terms of comic book movies. I don't know if you'll have like a solid standalone trilogy like this. We'll probably say the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy to some degree, but I think it's going to be a very tough act to follow. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing Matt Reeves' trilogy and seeing what he does with the material and to see his spin on it. But I do think, for better or worse, in terms of a Batman film or certainly a Batman trilogy, it will always be held up to what Nolan managed to do with this. So although I don't like where it ended with the final film, just viewing it, observing it as a complete thing, the impact that it had there is undeniable.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. The trilogy feels like a consistent trilogy. It feels like one man's. I know he obviously worked with David S. Goyer, who worked with his brother for a little bit, but this feels like this is a Nolan. In the same way we talk about the Raimi films, that was inherently the Sam Raimi trilogy. Same with the prequels with George Lucas's. The same way that Dark Knight Trilogy is this. Peter Jackson and Lord of the Rings. After Lord of the Rings, this is probably the most influential trilogy of the century so far. I mean, don't take this as the wrong way around. Maybe this is more influential than Lord of the Rings in terms of what happened to cinema after. Again, more the comic book movie genre, not necessarily influences themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But without this, we don't have the boom we've had for 10 years. We don't have, 4 Marvel films a year on average, which is what they're trying to get to. Studios fighting for rights. Warner Brothers rebooting every take on Batman because something's different. We don't get, I don't think, any of this. We would have had a bit of the MCU. And, Avengers did work. It made $1 billion just before this came out, 1.5 to be exact. But I don't think they're able to take risks without thinking they made Batman in real world today. And certainly look at some of the Marvel films. Winter Soldier, more than any others, feels like it's in this territory where we're not just going to make a comic book film, we're going to actually make a film set in the comic book universe. That's how I feel about some of the Marvel films, not all of them. It's that kind of dipping into a genre and putting someone else's take on it. I think to mar the influence of this trilogy, and that is important. Talking as we got up here, the Christopher Nolan month, it's, as we said at the beginning, I don't think without this trilogy he has the open checkbook, I guess we can call it. He does now. He can't pitch any idea. Inception worked. He doesn't get obsession about the Dark Knight. I think say Rise is hypothetically bombed. Obviously, it was never going to. Would they have had question marks over Interstellar? Maybe. But this was another short hit with critics and box office. Worth mentioning, this is his, I believe, first film since Insomnia not to be nominated for an Oscar. Nothing at all, which is fair. I've got no issue with that. It feels the most blockbuster-esque of the trilogy in terms of scale, what they're trying to do. However, I would have loved a score nomination for Zimmer, but influentially, this has a tremendous impact, not on, I guess, the other people, but to me, myself as well. As I kind of spoke about over last week, we're going to get one of these sort of things in the Nolan month, but the influence this trilogy's had on how I've gone on life after, influences it had on, I mentioned before in this one when I was started studying film just after this came out, I mentioned in the Prestige and the reviews of this film, I started buying all of them after. That was when it clicked another trigger to, I'm looking at this and this and this. So I don't think the influence of this trilogy can be undermined at all. Obviously, we've got different thoughts on the final one. That's fine. Don't mind that. But I'm just sat and think, at least it's not a Star Wars trilogy discussion where it's here's two different directors. You know what I mean? Wrong conversation, wrong thing to bring up. But it's here is a trilogy with a complete, consistent to a point, I guess, creative direction. And I think that is what's important. And it should show companies. And we're hoping, they keep saying we're getting a Batman trilogy with Matt Reeves. I really hope we do get a trilogy and it's not another Warner Brothers political decision that comes, not even political, just Warner Brothers getting in the way as they so often do. That's my biggest worry. But the only downside of the Matt Reeves trilogy is that it will only get compared to this because it's a trilogy. So very high standards, very intriguing standards, but I'm excited to see both what comes next for the character of Batman and obviously Nolan's films, pretending we haven't already seen the next two that come out after.
And we've got many more reviews coming up after this. We'll go to the schedule to round off in just a second. But yeah, I mean, that's the big thing for me in terms of, yes, we are reviewing these as part of Christopher Nolan month and looking at these and talking about them as a Christopher Nolan film. But this is special in that it is Batman and it is a legacy character. And it is my favorite character in fiction. I'm always fascinated to sort of look back at the character's on-screen history. And, it's still history in the making now, for better or worse. And, through every good adaptation, through every bad one, through every middle of the road one, I'm always there for it. And it's always just another point on the map to chart the history of the on-screen character. So will we have a war now with Ben Affleck's Batman possibly returning if it's a hit next year with the Snyder Cut and the Reeves trilogy? That's going to be conflicting in the public limelight. But anyway, that's a different discussion. That's not specifically related to this one. So we've done it. We've finished. Well, we haven't done Christopher Nolan month. We've finished the Batman trilogy, but we still have a couple more Christopher Nolan films lined up after this one. So there we go, right there. So we have the quiz this week on Thursday the 20th. We'll be compiling questions for that over the next coming day. That is going to be a tough quiz. That is for the die-hard Nolan fans, but it is going to be fun, and we always do enjoy doing those quizzes as well. So look out for that Thursday. Saturday is our next movie review. It will be Interstellar. I've recently rewatched that one, got a lot of thoughts on that one. Monday the 24th will be Dunkirk, and then we will be taking a trip to the IMAX to see Tenet on opening day, and we're very much hyped. Tickets have been bought. Tickets are available now. Please do pick them up. This is going to be the big one. Everything post-lockdown is riding on this support film, and it's so nice that it's a Christopher Nolan film as well. It's just like, oh, finally. We're back kind of thing. We've had all these re-releases, but in terms of new films, that's going to be the one to see us through. So should we end with social medias and stuff like that, George? Pass over to you.
As usual, find us on Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, and on Instagram at Cinema_Savvy. Been doing a lot of GIFs recently. We've got a lot of fun. Rather than just tweeting photos of posters, we get to each find our own GIFs, and we had a little fight one this morning, didn't we? I don't know if you saw it, actually. I'll talk to you about it after. But no, like I said, stick around for the quiz. We'll announce more details. It'll be 8 or 8:30 p.m. this Thursday. We will have Tate on with us as well for this one. He will be making a quick cameo into Christopher Nolan. So I'm very much looking forward to doing a quiz with that. So with that in mind, I am going to do an outro for once. So as usual, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you've not been watching live with us, do comment your thoughts on the Dark Knight Rises. If you've made it this far, I'm sure you've made your opinions quite clear now. We've almost done the entirety of the length of the film. That's how long we've spoken tonight about this. We knew it'd be long. I don't think either of us anticipated 2 hours, 10 minutes to be exact.
I thought it would be pushing 2 hours. I didn't think it would clock past 2 hours, but here we are.
Anyway, for all guys' support, we absolutely love it. We love reading what you're saying. Someone mentioned about doing vlogs. Maybe there'll be one for Tenet. We'll let you know. But in the meantime, do follow us. That's the best way to get updates. And do press the bell button, as Tate used to also go on about, because it'll give you notifications 30 minutes before we go live and when we do go live, so you can catch us. And the quiz this Thursday is going to be an interesting one. Some questions for Nolan diehards. It's not just for Nolan diehards, but I would hope that if you're doing it, you at least try and watch Following or Insomnia, because we're not just going to avoid them for the sake of avoiding them. So that's my kind of final few words on that.
Yep, absolutely. So thank you. So let us know, are you Team Chris or Team George on this one? We will read the comments, and we will see you on Thursday for the quiz. Thanks for watching.